You're already disinvited.
Oh.
I got 45 seconds. Okay.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the second day of the World Prosperity Forum here in Zurich, organized by the Heartland Institute. I should also say good morning to all of you joining us via live stream. This is the second day of 5 days organized by Heartland on the same week, during the same days, same times as the Davos World Economic Forum taking place just down the street, about 150 kilometers from here. Welcome to all of you. My name is Alvino Mario Fantini. I'm the editor-in-chief of the European Conservative Magazine and News Portal. And I'm here to speak to you about one of the many boondoggles and multilateral structures, entities that threatens our freedoms, not just in Europe, but around the world. Specifically, I'm here to speak about the EU. As I said, I'm the first of 5 speakers. I'll be followed by former President of the Czech Republic, Václav Klaus, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss, István Kiss, the President of the Danube Institute, and Ellen Krieger-Fantini, the Deputy Editor of the European Conservative. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, it's a thrill for me to speak to you at this World Prosperity Forum, which I hope will be repeated every year from now on to counter the message and the narrative being pushed by Davos. This week in Davos, the high priests of globalism have once again convened to sip champagne, sketch utopian blueprints on their silk napkins, and declare what you shall own, how you shall live, and above all, what you shall be permitted to say. This week, we answer them with the roar of free men and women who refuse to be their subjects. But first, let me take you back to a younger version of myself, still an idealistic young man with more hair and fewer scars, still convinced that the world could be mended by good intentions. Decades ago, I plunged headfirst into the world of international development and energy policy, working on projects financed and implemented by various multilateral bureaucracies. I did so not because I agreed necessarily with their purpose, quite the opposite. I wanted to see the globalist machine in action, up close, and understand its inner workings. And what I discovered was sobering. Behind the glossy reports and noble rhetoric lay inefficiency, mind-numbing bureaucracy, and an unmistakable sense of entitlement. Financial and political pressures were used to impose narrow agendas and to force states and nations into ideological obedience and policy compliance. Local communities and sovereign governments were told their own knowledge and priorities and sovereignty did not count. For me, it was a reminder that freedom is not a gift bestowed by some authority. Freedom is claimed, fought for, by those who refuse to be dictated to. Right now, that same kind of refusal is rising across Europe and around the world. But here in Europe, where the EU's aggressive, freedom-crushing, and manipulative agenda has pushed citizens to the breaking point, it is fueling new parties. The EU's agenda is one that demands exposure, confrontation, and ultimately defeat. And as we rally here this week to rattle the cages of leftist globalism, I repeat what I and others have argued elsewhere. We must deconstruct the global administrative state and dismantle the supranational overreach of the EU. Let's begin by remembering that the EU was born from the ashes of World War II, envisioned by men of profound faith who sought peace through cooperation, not coercion. Robert Schuman, Alcide de Gasperi, Konrad Adenauer, these founding fathers, deeply influenced by their Catholic faith, imagined a community of sovereign nations collaborating freely, not a centralized superstate devouring autonomy. How far we have fallen. Today's EU has deviated grotesquely from this vision, morphing into a supranational monstrosity. Now, a pivotal figure in this transformation was Jacques Delors, President of the European Commission from 1985 to 95. Delors, a committed French socialist, not a coincidence, played a key role in laying the groundwork for the Maastricht Treaty, which established the euro and expanded EU powers. Delors exploited favorable political conditions to push for centralization, shifting power from national capitals to Brussels, thus creating a powerful technocratic machine. And he turned the dream of balanced cooperation into a centralized bureaucracy, becoming himself, in a way, a new Caesar. Now, this is an apt comparison. Belgian historian David Engels has astutely observed that the EU, much like the late Roman Empire in its decline, is now hastening its own decline through relentless over-centralization and the erosion of national diversity, replacing the rich mosaic of European nations with a homogenized technocratic order that ultimately weakens the very civilization it claims to protect. The Eurosceptic Bruges Group, founded in 1989, has also long argued that the EU has evolved into an anti-democratic entity that prioritizes elite control over popular will. In her famous 1988 Bruges address, Lady Thatcher, who inspired the Bruges Group, warned that attempts to suppress nationhood and concentrate power at the center of a European conglomerate would only wreak damage. How right she was. Let me give you a brief overview of the kinds of damage and the kinds of assaults on economic, national, and intellectual freedom that the EU has produced so far. Well documented elsewhere, the EU undermines economic freedom through a web of regulations that stifle enterprise. There is the notorious Common Agricultural Policy, which consumes 40% or more of the EU budget on subsidies that perpetuate inefficiency and dependency. Family farms, for example, in Poland and Italy, once vibrant stewards of the land, now buckle under nitrogen limits and red tape that favor industrial giants, locking rural communities into cycles of stagnation. Fiscal rules like the Stability and Growth Pact have imposed austerity on nations like Greece and Spain, pushing youth unemployment to 25% and more and eroding financial freedom. The euro itself, once a symbol of unity, has become a straitjacket, stripping countries of monetary sovereignty and forcing painful adjustments that have devastated economies. And then there's the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, hailed as a privacy shield, which has instead become a millstone around the necks of small businesses. Compliance costs for the GDPR average 10,000 euros annually for small and medium enterprises, with some facing burdens of up to €500,000, all while larger corporations like Google and Meta navigate the rules with ease. Such measures only stifle innovation and entrench monopolies. Then there is the EU's misuse of rule of law arguments to punish non-compliant nations. Hungary, as you all know, has faced repeated threats under Article 7 proceedings for policies that prioritize their own national sovereignty. The EU has withheld billions in funds, framing the country's sovereign choices as violations of, quote, European values, a cynical ploy to enforce conformity. Indeed, under Ursula von der Leyen's presidency, the European Commission's overbearing, tyrannical approach has reached new heights. Von der Leyen's public statements have been dismissive of national leaders who resist her vision, framing their resistance as threats to the European project rather than legitimate democratic choices. As our friend and colleague Václav Klaus, who will speak after me, has incisively written, quote, the European Union is a post-democratic and post-political structure that goes against all our values and ideals, end quote. Through regulation, subsidies, monetary control, sanctions, the EU has seized the commanding heights of the economy and has turned what was meant to be a community of free nations into a technocratic machine that dictates what once sovereign peoples decided for themselves. Now, the assault on freedom by the EU does not stop merely at the economic or the political. It reaches into the very realm of thought itself, the realm where dissenting thought and political philosophy breathe. And here the EU is not merely overreaching, it is committing a slow, deliberate murder of the intellect. The Digital Services Act, the DSA, is the most visible instrument of this crime. It hands Brussels the power to demand that platforms remove content deemed, quote, hate speech, quote, hard to define what that means, or disinformation, also hard to define what that means. I suppose it depends on your perspective or your political ideology. There are fines of up to 6% or more of global turnover for the non-compliant companies. The result is predictable. Platforms now over-censor preemptively. Conservative voices, like, for example, Eva Vlaardingerbroek, the Dutch influencer, and others, are now deplatformed or shadow banned. And major social media companies are pressured to suppress certain narratives under the guise of fighting foreign interference. This is not safety. This is narrative control. When the state begins to police what may be said, what may be thought, written, or taught, it does not merely restrict speech, it restricts the very possibility of intellectual freedom. Articles, essays, and op-eds that question the dominant narratives on migration, gender, family, or identity are now flagged, reported, and sometimes removed from platforms under the DSA's vague provisions. This is not an accident. It is by design. It is a feature. When Brussels decides what constitutes hate speech, it can decide what constitutes legitimate thought. When Brussels decides that certain ideas are harmful, it is not protecting people, it is protecting power. When Brussels decides that certain books, ideas, or theories are dangerous, it's not safeguarding society, it's safeguarding the regime. A continent that once gave the world the cathedral, the novel, the essay, the university, is now being told what it may contemplate, what it may create, and what it may think. Now, we've seen such a pattern before. In every empire that has feared the free mind. Yesterday, Mark Morano delivered a searing presentation here at the World Prosperity Forum, tracing the long, dark history of elites who have seized control over free peoples by invoking fabricated emergencies and claims of necessity, weaponizing crises to suppress dissent. Rome feared the Christians who spoke of a higher law. In revolutionary France, the Jacobins feared the clergy and the citizens who dared to question their bloodthirsty regime. The Soviets and the Chinese Communist Party feared the artists, the intellectuals, and the poets who refused to lie. And now Brussels fears the Europeans who refuse to conform. the more they censor, the more they reveal their own fragility. This is why the fight for intellectual freedom is not peripheral. It is central, and it complements the fight for economic freedom. We cannot win the economic or political battles if we lose the battle for the mind. We cannot defend the family or the nation if we cannot first defend the right to think, to speak, to question, and to create. That is why the EU's assault on intellectual freedom is not just dangerous, it is existential. It's worth recalling briefly that the EU's overreach is also the latest manifestation of a centuries-old pattern of social engineering. Thinkers from diverse ideological backgrounds have long warned us about this. James Burnham, in his seminal The Managerial Revolution in 1941, described how a new class of manager, technocrats and administrators, seized power in modern-day societies, displacing both capitalists and workers with systems of control. The economist Lord Peter Bauer eviscerated the aid industry, calling it a boondoggle that only fostered dependency and fueled corruption rather than real growth. And even the left-leaning progressive scholar Arturo Escobar has argued that the entire concept of international development and what he called the problematization of poverty, taking poverty and turning it into a mathematical problem to be solved by applying certain formulas. Even he has seen that the aid industry only justifies state intervention and control by globalist elites. All these voices, conservative, libertarian, progressive, have converged on a single truth, that multilaterals, like the EU, cloak everything they do in the language of, quote, democratic values, quote, sustainability, quote, inclusion, and shared progress, but are staffed themselves by elitists and treat national sovereignty as an obstacle. And they treat local traditions as anachronisms to be replaced through modernization. We must heed such warnings, and we should seek to dismantle all these multilateral structures, including the EU. Now, much like its counterparts, the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, the EU embodies the detached, elitist mentality that dominates global governance. Its staff function as a sort of bureaucratic aristocracy. They are a privileged class of officials who enjoy lavish, largely tax-free perks at the expense of the European taxpayer. A few examples of what makes them feel so entitled. European commissioners pocket nearly 26,000 euros monthly, largely untaxed. Directors general at the EU earn 18 to 22,000 per month untaxed. Parliamentarians take home more than 10,000. Plus, listen to these supplements. They receive tax-free housing allowances, family subsidies, business class travel, untaxed office expenses, meal vouchers, company cars, petrol cards, private healthcare, education grants for elite schools, and pensions of 70% of their final salary. In short, the staffers of the EU and other multilaterals represent the very divide that has been fueling the populist nationalist revolt against globalism, from Brexit to Trump's America First pushback to Milei's revolt against Argentine bureaucracy. To be sure, the EU's anti-democratic tendencies and bureaucratic excesses have not gone unchallenged. There have been numerous works over the years that have analyzed with great rigor the shenanigans of the EU. There's Bernard Connolly's The Rotten Heart of Europe, such a great title. There's The Great Deception by Christopher Booker and Richard North. These works chronicle how the European project was built on deliberate misrepresentations, what we might call lies. Former Dutch MEP Dirk-Jan Eppink's book, Empire of Little Kings, pulled back the curtain on the European Parliament's inner workings, revealing a vicious nest of petty fiefdoms far removed from the concerns of average European citizens. And President Václav Klaus's book, Europe, The Shattering of Illusions, offered an eloquent, robust condemnation of the EU as an anti-democratic construct. I'm sure we'll hear more on that later today. All these voices have carefully documented the EU's freedom-crushing agenda. But fortunately, we are also very, very lucky to have statesmen willing to push back. Let's recall Javier Milei's appearance at Davos 2 years ago, where he boldly proclaimed the following, quote, "The Western world is in danger because those who are supposed to defend the values of the West are co-opted by a vision of the world that inexorably leads to socialism and thereby to poverty." End quote. Milei's call to embrace free enterprise capitalism as, quote, "the only morally desirable system to end global poverty," end quote, resonates powerfully with our fight. And in his own address at the World Economic Forum in 2020, President Trump offered a forceful rejection of the globalist elite's climate agenda, declaring the following, quote, "To embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse," end quote. I hope Greta Thunberg and all her acolytes are listening. This was a pointed rebuke of the Davos crowd's agenda and their calls for more regulation, and it perfectly captured the growing resistance to globalism. One more reference. Yesterday, our friend Harold Wilimski delivered an unflinching address here at the World Prosperity Forum, exposing what he called, quote, "the dark forces of Davos," end quote, and summoning the forces of light, the rising tide of patriots, conservatives, and freedom-loving citizens across Europe who refuse to surrender their heritage, their economies, and their right to self-determination to unelected overlords. Happily, it's not just our statesmen who are pushing back against the globalist mentality. Patriotic citizens are fighting back too. Indeed, a grassroots freedom movement is rising and spreading across Europe and the world. My wife, Ellen Krieger-Fantini, will speak later today on this European freedom movement, and other speakers too will delve into its growing strength. And as I said at the beginning, you'll hear from former President Václav Klaus and former Prime Minister Liz Truss about their own experiences facing their own deep states in their countries. I'll leave the further inspiring details to them. Let me conclude with the following. To win this battle for the soul of Europe and the future of freedom, we must move from diagnosis to decisive action. And here are a few minor suggestions. First, I think we must amplify the truths about how the EU operates and expose their lies. As an editor and publisher, I've featured voices that dismantle the EU's falsehoods, piece by piece, argument by argument, just as my early journalism once unmasked the exaggerations of climate alarmism. We must make it impossible for the Brussels narrative to go unchallenged. Every deception must have a rebuttal. Second, we must forge coalitions across borders and factions. Look to the examples of Orban, Meloni, Trump, and Milei, leaders from very different traditions, but they found common ground and common cause in defending national sovereignty. We must build bridges among all those who value freedom so that Eastern Europe's resilience, for example, can link arms with Western populism. Third, we must demand a dramatic, non-negotiable rollback of regulatory burdens and put an end to economic terrorism disguised as global governance. And finally, we must champion concrete policies that deliver real freedom and real prosperity. A few quick examples of this. Demand energy independence through the full use of oil, natural gas, and nuclear power, rejecting the suicidal fantasy of decarbonization. We must wage war on poverty through sweeping tax cuts and deregulation that unleash the creative energies of ordinary people. We should protect liberty by rejecting or pulling out of suffocating international treaties and directives that only bind our nations. And we should harness the fire and passion of the young. They're not afraid to question authority. They're not afraid to speak plainly. They know what's at stake. This is the path forward if Europe is to survive, not as a homogenized superstate, but as a constellation of free, proud, self-governing nations. The hour is late, but people are waking up. And the tide may be finally turning. Let's seize this moment. Let's shatter the dominion of these elites and forge a Europe and a world of free and sovereign nations. Thank you very much. Now I'll turn the podium over to James Taylor, President of the Heartland Institute. James.
Well, thank you, Mario, for such a powerful opening remarks. And thank you for joining us here at the World Prosperity Forum. I'm James Taylor. I am president of the Heartland Institute. And getting to the World Prosperity Forum has been quite a process, although not necessarily a lengthy one. Back just a few weeks ago, as reports were trickling out in the media about who would be attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, what themes they would be emphasizing, what impact they were hoping to achieve in the world. Several of us at the Heartland Institute and among our friends with other organizations began thinking, what can we do to give a competing alternate vision? And we felt that what we could possibly do was maybe send a crew, a handful of folks to Zurich, because the World Economic Forum had absolutely monopolized all the hotel rooms and meeting spaces in Davos. But perhaps have a podcast, perhaps do a few interviews and just highlight what the World Economic Forum really is, what they don't want you to know, and what competing vision is available. And it's amazing how quickly enthusiasm for this built. It spread like wildfire. First of all, I contacted a few of my friends here in Europe that work with freedom-oriented organizations and asked if they might like to join us. And the response was just so incredible. Wow, this is exactly what we need. Yes, please. And by the way, I know other folks, other movement leaders in Hungary, in the Netherlands, in Austria, in Poland, in the UK that would like to participate. So very quickly, the World Prosperity Forum was born. And it is very important and necessary that we also, as the freedom movement, join together and present this alternative. Because in Davos, the World Economic Forum, it has this title that everyone thinks is this multilateral, governmental, international organization that's all powerful. And sure, you have leaders of state, you have industry leaders, you have entertainment moguls attending. But the World Economic Forum is a think tank. It's an NGO. And it's an NGO that promotes a collectivist, globalist, socialist vision. What the World Economic Forum does is it brings together those who the collectivist movement feel can have the most influence, who can have the most impact. How do we implement, is what they say, how do we implement our collectivist agenda? And the way they do it is to pull all these leaders, these thought leaders, these movement leaders, these political leaders, and they talk about what their goal is. Some of you may have seen, although not recently because they took the video down, but the World Economic Forum, when they posted their video, you'll own nothing and you will be happy. That at its heart is what the World Economic Forum is all about. That at its heart is what the collectivist, globalist, what they like to call democratic socialism, no, it's socialism. That is their goal. You won't own your own car. You'll have to get an Uber, you'll have to do some ride share, or in their ultimate vision, you just have mass transportation and bicycles. You won't own anything that you count on right now. You won't own a house. The American dream, and I imagine it's not just in America, is to own your own home, have your own backyard, be the master of your domain, not worry about someone pounding upstairs or blasting their stereo. It's your space. No, that is to be fought against, according to the World Economic Forum. According to the figures that you see in the news this week in Davos, that's what they're pushing for. They want to take away our freedoms. They want a collectivist, top-down, government-centered society. The reason why there's been such enormous energy and enthusiasm for an alternative, for the World Prosperity Forum that emerged just from an idea for just a small gathering into actually this forum that we're having today and that we hope to have year after year. The reason why the enthusiasm has been so strong in Central Europe and Eastern Europe especially is because these are nations and peoples who have lived under the Davos dream. When you've had no freedom, when you've had the government stepping on your neck, when you're afraid to talk openly with your own children because they might turn you in to the government authorities, when you taste that freedom, you don't want it taken away. It can be taken away through military aggression from a totalitarian socialist state. It can be taken away by internal forces who seek to transform society, as the globalists do in Davos, without a military conflict. But one day you wake up, little by little, these freedoms have been taken away. One day you wake up and you realize you're right back behind the Iron Curtain. We in the West, we thought that we won the Cold War. In a sense we did, but in a sense we didn't. Because many of the forces here in the West that should be enjoying and promoting and spreading the benefits of freedom and prosperity are working to implement their collectivist socialist vision. And in its fullest expression, in its inevitable expression, socialism, the socialist ideology, does turn into totalitarian socialism. We don't have freedoms under that system. Here at the World Prosperity Forum, you're going to hear from many speakers, many different topics, many different points of view, but ultimately people who love freedom, who want to promote economic prosperity and not a state-sponsored governance culture. Our next speaker, Václav Klaus, is the president of the Czech Republic, emerged from Czechoslovakia, a communist nation, a communist-dominated nation that answered to their Soviet masters. If you ever go to Prague, and I urge everyone here to do so, it's a wonderful city. But my favorite part about Prague is they have the Museum of Communism. It is a building that is set up that documents pre-World War II, through World War II, post-World War II, how Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, now Czechia, how it was dominated by these socialist forces that Davos would like to implement again. The human pain and misery, the destruction of the country. Finally, Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic, Czechia, they threw off their communist overlords. Václav Klaus, as president, was instrumental in that emerging process in building a society that is centered on fundamental human freedoms. It's amazing that today, if you say that you stand for freedom, most of the media, most of the governing class, the elites, look at you with disdain, look at you as a threat. Imagine that. I stand for freedom. You get criticized for it. Václav Klaus has been and continues to be a hero, championing individual freedom, championing prosperity. I'm going to read the formal bio for President Klaus, but I just want you to know, everybody out there, that it's more than just a formal bio. It's a human being. It's a man whose vision, whose courage has preserved that freedom in Czechia, throughout Europe, hopefully, throughout the world. He's an inspiration. Václav Klaus is a Czech economist and politician who served as president of the Czech Republic and prime minister. A longstanding advocate for free market economics and national sovereignty, Klaus is known internationally for his skepticism of climate change alarmism and European federalism. He has authored multiple books on economics, politics, and EU governance. After his presidency, Klaus remained active as a public intellectual, giving lectures and participating in global policy debates. His views challenge mainstream environmental narratives and emphasize economic freedom and skepticism of supranational institutions. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Václav Klaus.
President Taylor, my good friend Antonio. It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you for organizing the first meeting of the World Prosperity Forum. Many thanks for giving me the floor and the opportunity to address this distinguished audience. Before attempting to discuss how to succeed in building, to quote Mr. President from your invitation letter, a freedom-based and prosperity-based alternative to the current world run by globalists and progressivists who have been gathering every year at the end of January in Davos at the World Economic Forum for the last more than 3 decades. Allow me to say a few words first about my relations and the Davos Forum. I found the idea of organizing this new gathering during the days of the Davos Forum and not far from Davos as an excellent one. The Davos Forum in the style of Klaus Schwab needs an alternative. Some of us have been waiting for such an alternative for a long time. This waiting has, for someone like me, a very, very special history. I am a sort of Davos veteran. I entered politics, as was mentioned in the introduction, in November 1989, in the moment of the fall of communism in my country, former Czechoslovakia. A few days later, I became the Minister of Finance in the first non-communist government, who was responsible for both for getting rid of the old, irrational, non-functioning communist central planning and for building the institutions of a free market economy after 40 years of devastating communism. The most difficult task was the transition, moving from one situation to another. The invitation to attend the Davos Forum 36 years ago, in January 1990, just a few weeks after entering the newly formed government and after the revolutionary opening of borders to the West, it was something almost unimaginable before. I was given the opportunity to see, meet, and talk with some famous Western politicians and economists for the first time in my life. I can afford, however, to say that some of us were more or less prepared for that. An additional benefit of this trip of mine was seeing the beauty of snow-covered Davos. For someone like me, who had been dreaming all my life of getting one day a chance to ski in the Alps, it was unforgettable, really. During my first visit there, I also participated on the main stage of Davos Forum in a debate, or rather a fundamental dispute, with the well-known American economist, very leftist Columbia professor, Joseph Stiglitz. Some of you may know the name. Joseph Stiglitz, later a Nobel laureate, who asked me on the stage and expected hundreds of TV cameras and expected a positive answer, whether we intended to build a third way system of society and economy. To the shock of Professor Stiglitz, and the moderator of the debate, which was the boss of Davos, Klaus Schwab. We three of us were on the stage, my answer was very clear and straightforward. My answer was, we are not interested in the third way because the third way is the fastest way to the third world. This sentence of mine, which was just expressed just accidentally unprepared, was for many years the opening sentence of the Wikipedia entry on the topic third way. I repeatedly stressed that we were interested in the first way in capitalism. That exchange of views was the first of my many conflicts in Davos. My frustration culminated in 2005, when after 16 uninterrupted visits to the Davos Forum, I finally said to myself, enough is enough. And after returning to Prague, I sat down and wrote and published a very critical article about the progressivist Davos Forum with the provocative title, Homo Davosensis. You can imagine, Klaus Schwab never forgave me for this, From that moment on, I was no longer invited there. When I heard that the Heartland Institute planned to initiate an alternative, the World Prosperity Forum, I became convinced that the advocacy of the first way of capitalism must be one of the fundamental ideas of the whole project. Already in 1990, I said that we wanted market economy. It was another well-known slogan of mine. We wanted market economy without adjectives. Without adjectives meaning mostly without the adjectives social on the one hand and green on the other, because these adjectives more or less deny the original meaning of the whole idea of market economy as we understood it through studying Mises, Hayek, Milton Friedman, and similar authors. Mentioning the adjective green brings me to the Heartland Institute, one of the crucial institutions fighting the idea of man-made global warming and climate alarmism for years already. More than a decade ago, I attended several Heartland Institute conferences. I remember Chicago conference, I remember New York City conference, and made speeches there. It was at a time when the fight with the global warming doctrine was still undecided. That moment is, to my great regret, over now. We must admit that we are not on the winning side these days, not on the winning side of this debate. This, of course, doesn't mean that we should surrender and stop fighting. On the contrary, that's the reason why we are all here, I suppose, more or less. Last December, I accepted the position of president of Clintel, another institution which is in a total disagreement with the IPCC. I noted that we Clintoners and our colleagues at the Heartland Institute are in the same boat. I came here today to express officially my, and I believe our interest in friendly and productive cooperation. Clinton, with its several national groupings, has succeeded in creating a very promising international network. Like Heartland, we try to contribute to answering the fundamental questions of our era. First, are men and women responsible for the current increase in temperatures worldwide, or for the increase in the average global temperature, if that concept is meaningful and worth studying at all? First question. Second, is the statistically measured temperature increase of recent decades proof of a long-term trend, and does it really endanger the future of mankind? Second question. And the third one, and if these two hypotheses are valid and justified, is there anything, and especially, is there anything meaningful that mankind can do about it? Meaningful, as an economist, I mean by meaningful as bringing more benefits than costs. Clinton, in the words of its founder and first president, Professor Berghout, has proclaimed 6 years ago that there is no climate emergency. Very well known and very often quoted statement, which has resonated all over the world. I myself, an economist and econometrician who became a politician at the moment of the fall of communism, published a book with the title Blue Planet in Green Shackles. It was already in 2007. I believe in the strengths and productiveness of economic theory and in explaining human behavior and in offering important guidance on how to rationally organize an economic system and on how to compose economic policies. I am convinced of the irreplaceable significance of free markets, as well as of the fundamental role of prices, on condition they reflect the crucial concept of scarcity in human decision-making. This economic way of thinking has been attacked through human history from many sides and angles. But the most dangerous attack, as regards our topics, came with the birth of green ideology, of environmentalism. This attack, of course, repeated in various forms many times throughout human history, came together with the activities of the Club of Rome and its infamous limits to growth at the end of the 1960s. As someone who lived in the communist Czechoslovakia at that time, I immediately felt the enormous danger hidden in these ideas and saw them in many respects as a threat similar to communism. From that moment on, I became a resolute critic of this ideology, or perhaps religion, which has no relation to science at all. The green ideology, in its various moments of history, found finally its best and most promising, I would say, weapon and argument against freedom and prosperity in the promoting of the hypothesis of dangerous global warming allegedly caused by irresponsible human behavior, irresponsible in the eyes of our opponents. This alarmist doctrine received a new impetus with the creation of the IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change, in 1988, which guarantees international political and, of course, even more importantly, financial backing for the whole green movement since the time. Since that moment, the whole world, and especially its western part, has been moving in one direction only, toward the victory of the global warming ideology, toward the merciless suppression of its opponents, and toward the historically unprecedented direct transformation of this ideology into government policy. These processes culminated in the official acceptance of the Green Deal as a fundamental doctrine of the European Union. European Union has no other doctrine. This is the missing link. They have been searching for something like that and finally got it. Where are we now? On the one hand, we can't deny that the critics of climate alarmism are, for many reasons, more silent and less visible these days than in the past. In addition to it, the generations of our children and grandchildren, indoctrinated already in elementary schools, have never experienced anything other than the official glorification of the alarmist doctrine and the arrogant ridiculing of anyone who dares to oppose it. On the other hand, we are witnessing growing criticism of the destructive consequences of the Green Deal, of the unprepared energy transition, of the blocking of nuclear power plants, and of the banning of combustion engines, and so on. As a result, people are becoming increasingly aware of these consequences. The recent activities undertaken in the United States by President Trump and his Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, are of great significance. I myself tried to address these developments at the worst moment in 2017 in my book with the title, Will We Be Destroyed by Climate or by Our Fighting the Climate? The point is that it was published in 2017 in Prague, Cosmopolis, but in Czech language. Whereas the first book of mine in 2007 had 18 editions, 18 translations in foreign languages all over the world, including such countries as Indonesia or such countries, In this time, I didn't attempt to publish this book of mine abroad or in a foreign language, which indicates that not only my persuasion that everything relevant had already been said on both sides of the debate, plus and minus, but to some extent also my partial resignation resulting from the fact that in our countries we were evidently losing ground at that era. Hopefully, we are now moving to a new a more optimistic era. And I think we feel it our task to do everything we can to move there as fast as possible. I interpret, Mr. President, rightly or wrongly, the Heartland Institute initiative to establish the World Prosperity Forum as a signal that the Institute wants to pay more attention to the economic side of the debate, of the matter. And which is something I strongly support. We must insist that one crucial aspect of the whole global warming debate relates to the economic issues and to the fundamental principles of economic science. Economists should discuss the role of prices in decision-making and the distortions caused by government-dictated prices. The economists study and discuss the role of discounting in any meaningful analysis and forecasting. The economists discuss the environmental Kuznets curves. The economists discuss, of course, the infamous energy transition. Last but not least, we are confronted with the very problematic emission allowances, which non-economists understand as a meaningful contribution of economists to the whole issue, which it is, of course, not. In reality, trading with emission allowances is a state-controlled administrative rationing system which only pretends to be market-friendly. It is frustrating that no one discusses these topics substantially anymore, not even my fellow economists. There is and I will come to the end, there is, and that's another dimension of the whole issue. There is no doubt that climate alarmism is not about excesses of climate, but about man and human society, about our freedom and prosperity. It's a secular ideology, a new political religion. It also reflects an arrogant Western way of looking at the world based on the thinking and way of life of affluent societies, affluent for the older generation, affluent in the old Galbraithian sense. Some of us still remember his book Affluent Society, published in 1959. So, as I asked in the subtitle of my Blue Planet in Green Shackles, almost 20 years ago, I asked, what is endangered, climate or freedom? That was the subtitle of the book. I am convinced that climate is more or less okay. I believe that many of us here see it the same way. So, once again, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me the floor and for allowing me to say this statement of mine, which really reflects my long-term views, long-term positions, long-term also political stances. Some of you may remember in the year 2007, when I was the president of the Czech Republic, there was in New York City an UN conference on climate, and I spoke there as president of the country, practically saying something very similar to what I am saying now. I was, of course, the only one among the 192 presidents or prime ministers of the world. And I still remember the atmosphere there in the main hall of the United Nations. Nevertheless, I'm sure we came here to discuss these issues, and we came here to continue fighting in this spirit. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Klaus. I remember very well, you mentioned earlier that you spoke at a couple of Heartland events in the past. I believe it was 2009, maybe give or take a year, but I think it's 2009. You were in Chicago. And we were hosting our annual climate conference. And Heartland's founding president, Joe Bast, great man, put together that conference and invited you to speak. And Joe asked you if you might be able to give us a little extra time, VIP reception, so to speak, but basically good friends of the Heartland Institute, people who've been in the freedom movement, Heartland staff, just to have a little bit of time, personal time with you before your address. And I remember going up there and I was nervous. I was in the presence of a great man. I'm still in awe of you. This champion of freedom, of liberty, with the courage to take on communism, the courage to fight back against it when it seeks to retrench itself. As you mentioned, your dealings with folks in Davos, I remember when you were president of the Czech Republic, when you held the presidency of the European Union, and the tremendous pressure that was put on you by the globalist elites, by the Davos crowd. You didn't shrink away. You could have shrunk away and been applauded. You could have shrunk away and been loved by the powers that be in the elites, but you stood by principle. But you gave us that time. You gave me time. You gave Heartland staff time. You gave time to anyone who was there, and you did so graciously. It's such an inspiring moment to see a great figure in history, but also to see the humanity, the kindness, the generosity. So thank you very much again, President Klaus. And President Klaus, a man whose time was in high demand, he gave it then, and it calls to mind another man whose time is in high demand today. The reason I wasn't here yesterday, I so regret not being here, but on the other hand, it was for a good reason. Yesterday, I was meeting with Nigel Farage in London. And if you know Nigel or have any knowledge of his day-to-day workings, getting 30 seconds from Nigel is quite the task. It means you're pretty important in his eyes, or he loves you very much. And Nigel gave us his time. And he said, yes, Monday, the 19th, let's meet. We can have one-on-one talks and strategizing. We can have a group setting if you'd like to bring some other people. We can have a public event. But I feel so strongly about the Heartland Institute. I want to do this for you. It's quite flattering. And in London, yesterday morning, putting on BBC News prior to our small group meeting with Nigel, it was, I won't say it's shocking, because this is what we went through under the Biden-Harris administration. But you have the rampant lawlessness. You have criminals getting away without punishment because, well, the criminals are the victims of society and whatever it may be. The economic problems, the affordability issues, where you had in the United States Joe Biden's inflationary policies. And of course, the costs are still there. Throughout Europe, throughout the UK, we had the same thing. And meeting with Nigel, it occurred to me that it reminded me back in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Ronald Reagan, such a great president, And perhaps we have an opportunity with the next elections in the UK, whether they're in 2029 or sooner. But wow, Nigel Farage, and of course, at the Heartland Institute, we're for ideas. And Nigel Farage is so closely aligned with the ideas of freedom. I love Nigel. If anyone else comes on board, any other party comes on board, if Labor comes on board, I will applaud them. But nevertheless, we have an opportunity perhaps for another special relationship like Reagan and Thatcher had with Nigel and Ronald Reagan, or Nigel and whoever succeeds Ronald Reagan. And I was thinking, as horrible as the Jimmy Carter years were, if we didn't have Jimmy Carter, we might never have had Ronald Reagan. Was it worth it? Probably, but boy, it was painful. And I think that's the situation we're in now. Looking at the situation in the UK, I think back to just a few years ago, and before we had Starmer and the Labour Party. It's amazing some of the coincidences, some of the commonalities in policy and politics in various countries. Here in, well, not here because I'm in Switzerland, I'm in Zurich, but in the United States, oftentimes one of my greatest frustrations at the Heartland Institute, we engage regularly with policymakers throughout the 50 states. I mean, regularly, frequently. We have many friends. One of the greatest frustrations, however, is I'll go into a deep red state where I expect that we have many friends in the legislature, but the things they say to the public and then how they vote and what they decide to put up for votes, how they act in private are totally different. They're maybe not presenting themselves as they should be. And that's a loss for the country. It's certainly a loss for the freedom movement. And I think back a few years ago, the UK had a great prime minister. A great prime minister. And this person, Liz Truss, will be speaking here in a moment. Liz Truss served for just a very short period of time. And Liz had the opportunity to do more. Liz Truss, when she became prime minister, when the Tories elevated her, she's a true academic. She's an intellectual. She's a brilliant thinker. She's charismatic. That's their star. They chose her to be prime minister. And Liz wanted to institute and began to institute basically Ronald Reagan's economic plan. Cutting taxes, cutting the size of government, a long-term economic plan of growth. And then in her own party, people fought back. Well, this will be disastrous. This is going to be bad in the polls. We have an election coming up. You can't do it. And Liz Truss could have very easily taken the easy route and really the selfish route, served as prime minister for a longer period of time. I mean, who wouldn't want to be prime minister and who wouldn't want to keep being prime minister? But Liz said, no, I'm not caving in. I'm not going to do what the blob, as they call it, what we call the uniparty in America, the deep state. She stuck by her guns. And as a result, she was ousted by her own party, which is unbelievable. Oftentimes I'll hear of people on the left who might say of her brief tenure as some type of shame. It's a badge of honor. It's a woman of principle. Liz Truss is an intellectual and moral compass pointing north. And as bad as things are in the UK today, and hopefully there'll be a much better leadership in the future, Liz Truss is the person who, whether it's Nigel Farage, whether it's Kemi Badenoch, whoever it is, should be looking to for inspiration, for guidance. And I know Nigel does, which is fantastic. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have Liz here today. So with that, once again, I'm going to read the formal bio and introduction, but we have between President Klaus, between Prime Minister Truss, also the former Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki, sent me a very gracious letter wishing everyone here the best of luck and hoping that he can attend in the future, inviting us to have this next year in Poland, although I think the World Prosperity Forum needs to be near Davos. But it's amazing to have such support and enthusiasm, even on such short notice for this event. Liz Truss is a British politician who served briefly as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 2022. She previously held several senior cabinet roles, including Foreign Secretary and International Trade Secretary. Truss is known for her advocacy of free market economics, deregulation, and tax reform. Since leaving office, She has remained active in political commentary and public speaking. She has a fantastic podcast, by the way. You should definitely check it out. Her tenure as prime minister was historically short, but widely analyzed in economic and political circles. She continues to influence conservative policy debates internationally, and that is so true. It's my pleasure to introduce to you former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss.
Well, good afternoon, and it's fantastic to be here in Zurich with so many like-minded people. What I want to talk to you about today is about our vision for the West and for Europe and for Britain. And it was Tolstoy who said or wrote, "All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." And he wasn't talking about the Beckhams at the time. But I think the same is true of countries. When you look at happy countries, what do they have? They have freedom. They have the importance of a sovereign nation state. They have Christian values. They have the family as the bedrock of society. And what we've seen over the past 50 years in Western Europe, but also in America, also across the Anglosphere in Australia and Canada, is an active attack on those values that made our countries successful, that made them great, and that made the people in those countries happy. And I've been a witness to this during my time in British politics. I was first elected in 2010 as a member of parliament. And at the time when I was elected, I've always been a free marketeer. I've always been skeptical of big government. I've been skeptical of organizations like the European Union. But I did not understand how bad it was. I did not understand how deep the rot went. I thought it could be fixed. I thought if I simply served my time in each government ministry, tried to do the right thing, that by getting more senior, I would be able to exert more influence and therefore change the policies. And I have come to understand that what has been going on in our countries and internationally is the advancement of an ideology that is fundamentally anti the very values that we hold dear. It is self-defeating and it is almost self-loathing. George Orwell talked about there was always an element of the British intellectual elite that hated Britain. But those people are now in power. And they're not just in power in Parliament, and clearly Keir Starmer is of that ilk. They're also prominent in our bureaucracies. They started to dominate our universities. They are even active now in private corporations who typically lobby for more government favors. And the ideologies that they support, one of them is Marxist and neo-Marxist economics. Another is Islamism, and we have a problem in Britain with the appeasement of Islamism. But also, it is the climate change extremism. It is the idea that the most important thing is reducing carbon, reducing the footprint on the planet, really is a tool of being able to control people. That's what it is ultimately about. And what we've seen really, and it's since the election of Tony Blair in Britain, I think you saw similar things really under Clinton and Obama. In America, you've seen similar trends in the EU, but we saw the implementation of those policies into the law so that the system wasn't just there to implement the will of the government of the day. it was actually part of implementing these policies. New laws were passed, such as the Human Rights Act, the Constitution Reform Act, the Climate Change Act 2008 that established a climate change committee of technocrats that essentially dictated what Britain's energy policy was. We saw the judiciary undermined with the Constitution Reform Act. So what we saw is a whole series of laws passed in Britain, a whole series of institutions created, and a whole series of placemen put in those institutions who couldn't be removed. Another example, of course, is the Bank of England. I'll come on to them in a minute because they play a key role in what happened in 2022. But essentially what you had was unelected bureaucrats usurping the power that used to be held by Parliament. And those unelected bureaucrats had a particular set of policies and ideologies that they followed. And those ideologies were essentially neo-Marxist, postmodernist ideologies. And the British elite, rather than worrying about the condition of people in Britain and issues like economic growth, were more worried about following these ideological trends. And of course, they were supported by organizations like the World Economic Forum, but other international institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank. The ideology was not just in Britain, it was right across an international network. And there was a whole series of things that it was acceptable to think. And we've seen the results of this. We've seen the results of these policies for the last 30 years. So in the year 2000, Britain was almost catching up with America in terms of our GDP per capita. Now, American GDP per capita is 50% higher in America than it is in Britain. Britain is now poorer per capita than Mississippi, which is the poorest US state. And some people say that if you take London out, we're poorer than Puerto Rico. And we are about to be overtaken by some of the now successful former communist countries, such as Poland, because they are not adopting the self-defeating policies that we've adopted in Britain. And probably of all of the policies, the most self-defeating has been the net zero policy. I mentioned the 2008 Climate Change Act. Well, under the Conservative government, I would say so-called Conservative government, under Theresa May, those regulations were tightened to get to net zero by 2050. And that has had a dramatic effect on the oil and gas industry. It's had a dramatic effect on the cost of energy. Britain now has the highest cost of energy in the developed world. And the result is car plants have closed down. We're no longer producing our own virgin steel. I think we're the only G7 country that doesn't produce our own steel anymore. We've seen communities like the mining community affected. We've seen oil and gas in the North Sea virtually stop. And of course, we've seen economic stagnation. I mean, people's living standards have not really risen for the past 30 years. And just to give you a bit of my background, I actually started my career in the oil industry, working for Shell in liquid natural gas shipping. And I understand how important oil and gas is to geopolitics. It's obvious. And this is something that President Trump is now leveraging in terms of what is happening across the world. And Britain and Europe have been completely caught napping. At the same time as oil and gas has got more important, we have indulged in completely self-defeating policies to essentially cancel this real bedrock of our economies and our societies. So back to 2022, I'd spent 10 years in various different government departments. The Environment Department, the Treasury, where one of the things I tried to do was stop COP26 happening in Britain. Unfortunately, it was defeated because too many of my cabinet colleagues were busy hugging Greta Thunberg. And I'm serious about what they were doing rather than concern. I mean, we just left the European Union, and I thought, even if you believed in climate change ideology, surely the priority should be getting a good Brexit deal and negotiating trade deals with the rest of the world, not hosting a hot air festival in Glasgow. But I lost that argument. And in fact, I ended up as foreign secretary when COP was on, having to deal with Joe Biden. So I think I have done my penance. I've done my time. But in 2022, and I won't go, you can read my book, 10 Years to Save the West, where I go through the whole gritty history of exactly what happened in the Conservative Party. And James referred to that. But essentially, we were in serious trouble. Boris Johnson, who'd been elected in 2019, and he'd been elected because people wanted change. He was boosterish. He was saying things are going to get better in the British economy. I'm going to deliver Brexit. And huge numbers of voters who previously voted Labour in the former industrial parts of Britain thought, we want something different. We're going to vote for Boris Johnson. He was deposed by various miscreants within the Conservative Party. You can read about it in my book. And the vacancy became open. And at the time, I had a choice. I knew this would be very, very tough. I knew that Boris had been deposed and that the people who were pulling the strings in the Conservative Party wanted Rishi Sunak to become Prime Minister. But I also knew Rishi Sunak was the man who'd put corporation tax up to 25%, who'd invented a new health and social care tax, who put a windfall tax on the oil and gas industry. And I thought, what is the point of getting elected as a member of parliament and serving as a government minister and doing my time sorting out everything from prison riots to floods? And I managed to get the worst prison riots when I was in the Justice Department since the 1990s and the worst floods since the 1950s when I was in the Environment Department. So I thought, what's the point of doing all that if I'm not going to try and change the direction this country is going and this party is going? And that is why I put myself forward. And it was a last minute campaign. I was actually in Bali at a G20 foreign ministers meeting where it popped up on TV that Boris had resigned. So it took me 18 hours to get back to Britain. I had to start the campaign. But what I said is we've got to change what we're doing. We've got to take on woke ideology. We've got to be clear that men are men and women are women. And we've got to sort out issues like immigration. And I said the most crucial priority initially is to get economic growth going. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow fracking in the United Kingdom, which had been banned. And Britain could be self-sufficient on gas if we allowed fracking, according to the geological studies that are being conducted. We could become a net energy exporter. And that was my plan. That's what I thought would completely transform Britain's economic fortunes. And I said, we've got to reverse this raise in corporation tax. We've got to get rid of all these other taxes that are stopping people invest in this country, whether it's IR35, whether it's VAT, VAT relief on duty-free shopping. We had all these taxes that were just stopping people visiting our country. They were stopping people investing in our country. I mean, people just didn't want to go out to work the extra hour because the tax system at particular points was just so counterproductive. So we put forward, I have got elected on this manifesto because there are, although Conservative MPs are not the most Conservative people in Britain, the Conservative members were. So they voted for me and I got through. We put in place these policies. And what happened? Well, what happened was the weekend after the mini budget, there started to be all these fluctuations in the market. And what happened was, and it later turned out, that this was caused by the Bank of England's failure to regulate pensions. So the Bank of England in 2024 admitted that 2/3 of all of that market movement in 2022 was down to their failure to regulate pensions and essentially allow the pension industry to bet that interest rates were going to be low forever. And what they also did is the night before the mini budget, they suddenly started a quantitative tightening program. So they announced the sale of £40 billion worth of government gilts for the first time in years. So you had this situation which was caused by the Bank of England. By the way, the Bank of England is committed to net zero ideology. The Bank of England governor is unsackable. The previous Bank of England governor, as everybody knows, who set a lot of these policies in train, was Mark Carney, who is now the Prime Minister of Canada and a regular at the World Economic Forum. So they did not like what I was trying to do, because I was trying to take on their policies. I was trying to get them to change monetary policy, which I thought as Prime Minister I should be able to do, as I was the one with the democratic mandate. But what happened was, at the time, they pointed the finger at me. They said, it's Liz Truss's mini budget that's caused all this. Gleefully, various Conservative MPs joined them. The entire mainstream media in Britain, like the BBC, revved it up. So even though the announcements I made were actually not as big as some of the spending announcement Rachel Reeves has made, or indeed the spending announcement Rishi Sunak made during COVID, they essentially just mounted a huge pile on me. And ultimately, in a prime ministerial system, MPs can get rid of the sitting prime minister, and that is, they put a gun to my head, and that's what happened. Lots of people ask me, would you have done something differently? I said, well, what exactly could I have done differently apart from, have a brain transplant into the 350 Conservative MPs that were in the House of Commons at the time, which I would have dearly loved to do, but didn't. But what I've learned from this whole experience, and this is important for anybody who gets elected in Britain in 2029, or I believe it's unlikely an election before then, is in order to change our countries now, it is much tougher, I believe, than it was in the 1980s, because we now have a radicalized bureaucracy. We essentially have people working at senior levels in the civil service, working at senior levels in organizations like the Bank of England, who do not agree with the principles I laid out at the start of this speech. They don't believe in freedom of speech, for starters, but they also don't believe in free market economics. They don't believe in supply side economics, and they don't want to say Britain is a Christian country. These are people with a particular ideological worldview. And essentially, those people have to be taken on. And I think we need to move to a system where we are able to appoint the people that we want to do the senior roles in government. I know it's extraordinary I'm saying that. Lots of people assume you can. Well, you can't. And that is one of the difficulties I had. So how is this going to be achieved? And the way I describe this in Britain is we're talking here about a counter-revolution. What Blair did was a revolution. Through things like the Constitutional Reform Act, through things like the Human Rights Act, through things like the Climate Change Act, he essentially mounted a revolution within our own country that put people in permanent positions of power that were anti-conservative views. That's what happened. And yes, there were lots of craven politicians between 2010 and 2024 who were in the Conservative Party, but it is also true that we were swimming against the tide. Now, what we should have done on day one is reverse all those laws. That's what we ought to have done in 2010. But even as I said, when I was first elected in 2010, I didn't really get how bad it was. I didn't really understand the extent to which this web of laws that had been created that made it inevitable that the government did certain things, and also gave the civil servants huge power to decide what was legal, what was the truth. The extent to which power was handed from Parliament to unelected technocratic experts is massive. And ironically, Britain voted to leave the European Union, but I think people in Britain have found that the technocrats in the British bureaucracy are, if not quite as bad, pretty bad, and deeply embedded and networked. And I remember when I was Foreign Secretary, I found words of my speech have been changed. And I asked one of the officials, I said, have you been on the phone to the State Department? Turns out they had. And the Biden administration, the State Department was networked in with the British officials and the European officials. And that's the way it worked. And that's the way it still works in Britain, which I think explains some of what's going on over things like the Chagos Island and the Chinese embassy. We have a system now in Britain that is actually hostile to freedom and hostile to what we all want to see, which is sovereignty, prosperity, and success for our citizens. So how is this counter-revolution going to be started? Well, first of all, I think we need a media revolution. And that is why I have started my new show, The Liz Truss Show, to talk about what is going on in Britain, telling people the truth, whether it's about the fact that people have been banned from Britain because they have right-wing views, the fact that people have been jailed in Britain because they have tweeted. There was a woman called Lucy Connolly. She's on my show a few weeks ago. She was jailed for 18 months for posting on X. Actually, I think the full sentence was 31 months for posting on X. Absolutely astonishing. Something that we thought we would only see in Eastern Europe of old is now, it feels like it's happening in Britain. And what we need is to develop an independent media ecosystem to challenge the narrative that is coming not just out of the BBC, but out of a lot of the print press, also other news outlets too. The second thing we need to do is build a movement of people, and that's why I'm pleased to be here with the Heartland Institute today. We need a network of people across Britain, across Europe, connected in with the United States of America that believe in these values, because believe me, the other side have a huge networked blob. They're not too far away from us now. We know who they are, and we need to build that movement of people. And then finally, once people understand the truth, once they're prepared to vote for leadership who do actually want to change things, the change actually has to be achieved. And that is going to be the most almighty battle. And we can see that battle going on in the United States. The court cases, the lawfare, the leaking from within institutions, that will all happen in Britain too. And these people are getting ready for it. They know that their current positions are threatened. They know that Keir Starmer is the most unpopular prime minister in British history. I think he's probably the most unpopular leader since King John, and you remember that King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta because he had taken such liberties and had all sorts of unfair taxes put in place. And I think Keir Starmer is his spiritual legacy in Britain. But that is the situation we face. So despite the dire situation, and we get a lot of sympathy from people overseas about what's happening in Britain, despite the dire situation in our country, I do believe that the public is on the side of change. I know that's what they want. So they were prepared to vote for Brexit. They voted for Boris on the promise of change. They are ready and waiting for things to happen. So all my final words are, please help us deliver that change in Britain, because I think it will also help other movements around Europe, and it will help strengthen what is happening in America as well, because we are all on the same side and our enemies are all on the other side. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Right Honorable Liz Truss for those words, for sharing her experiences with what we call the deep state, what you call the blob, and for the inspiring conclusion. Thank you. I'd like to introduce István Kiss, who earlier I called the president, but actually he is the executive director, much more impressive title, executive director of the Danube Institute, one of the leading think tank from Hungary, and one of those nodes globally that is creating precisely the kind of networks that we need to fight global progressivism, neo-communism, neo-Marxism. Let me read from his bio to be formal about it, since James set the precedent. István is a political scientist and an international relations expert. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree at Pázmány Péter Catholic University in Budapest and at the University of Edinburgh. Currently, he's also, among his many other duties, working on his PhD at his alma mater. From 2013 to 2018, he worked at the Századvég Foundation, which I believe means 21st Century Foundation?
End of the century.
End of the Century Foundation. And then he worked as a senior research fellow at that foundation before moving on to the Prime Minister's office as political advisor. István, I give you the podium.
Thank you very much, Mario, for the kind words, and also sorry for it took a bit of time to get out of the the rows. We have a very packed room here, luckily. I will, kind of try to do a bit of a promotion of the Danube Institute. Sorry about that, but Mario did a pretty good job, but I'm not sure if other people in the room and who are following online know that much about Danube, so please give me this allowance that I will speak a couple of minutes about Danube Institute. Our institution was established in 2013 with the main goal to build bridges and connections between Hungary, but also broadly speaking, the region, the Visegrad region, so our friends in the Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, and the Anglosphere mainly. So originally, we were very much focusing on building connections with our good friends in America, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. And quite recently, in the past 5 years, 6 years, we kind of kept keeping that focus, still extended our cooperations in Europe and also in like-minded countries across the globe, like Israel, India, and the Far East as well. What we believe in is connecting people who are conservatives across the globe. We have basically 4 main principles. One is conservatism in social, cultural, and religious affairs. The second is, and I think that's more related to the topic of the event itself, is a classical liberal tradition in economics. A third one is a kind of a respectable realist transatlantic policy, which means we believe in NATO very much and what it brings to the security of Europe. And the fourth one is kind of a new one because it's something which, again, relates more to this topic and something which we kind of considered as evident, but sadly, nowadays it's not necessarily evident, is a belief in the nation state. That the best form of cooperation is still nation states, and also that real democracy can only work in nation states. So these are our 4 main principles, and we're very happy to work together with organizations who broadly share these principles with us. What do we do? We mainly believe in the exchange of people and ideas. How do you do that? We think we do that mainly with joint events, joint research papers, and visiting fellowships. So what we have been doing is trying to do as many events as possible, and that's why we're very proud to be here. And I hope that we will be able to actually do much more with the Heartland Institute in the future. I'm very enthusiastic about that. And also we try to do joint research. That's again something we're very much interested to find like-minded partners across the globe to do research on those topics which we're passionate about. And thirdly, fellowships. So we try to bring as many people to Hungary and to the region to kind of show what's going on in Hungary and the region, to help these people better understand what's going on in the region. So if somebody is interested in what is going on in Europe, in Hungary, reach out to us, and we are very happy to try to figure out a fellowship to that person. After that short promotion, I will go to my actual topic, which is Hungarian conservatism. I don't want to give like a huge lecture about what is Hungarian conservatism, how it changed, things like that. What I really want to talk about is what the current government in Hungary has been trying to do in the past 16 years, basically. And why do I think that's important for the event? I think there's two main reasons. One is that we had a conservative government which, unlike sadly some other conservative governments across the globe, actually was not just conservative in rhetoric or in kind of principle. It was conservative in actual policy measures. So we had a government who were from a very beginning implemented actual conservative policies, which was pretty unique. Because of this, and this is the second point I think I'm here, we have been very much in the forefront of fighting against this kind of globalist progressive agenda, which has been pushed by some governments and some international institutions in the past, well, I mean, I think 20, 30 years, perhaps even more. They very early recognized our leader, Viktor Orban, as a kind of an enemy of this agenda. As a black sheep who doesn't follow some of the toposes and kind of common knowledge they try to push down on our throats on issues like family policy, migration, or globalism. So I think the Hungarian case is interesting for these two main reasons, because we're not a big country. We're at best a middle-sized country in Hungary, but we like to think about ourselves actually as a small country. Now, we're not small compared to, let's say, the Baltics, but of course, compared to the UK or our good friends in America, we are a small country. Despite this, our government has been very brave and stood up to these pressures, even though we could have caved like some other governments. So that's why, all due respect to some of our friends, when, for example, Italian friends complain that, oh, Hungary can do it, but Italy could never do it because this or the courts or the EU or something, I'm always kind of chuckling a bit inside, because if Hungary can do it, I'm pretty sure Italy could do it, because it's a much bigger economy. And if, you know, Italy would be kind of threatening the EU, there will be a much bigger kind of a pressure coming than the pressure you have from Hungary, which is a much smaller member state. So I kind of like to encourage people to try to, you know, find your own voice, be proudly conservative. Don't care about what the media says, don't care about what the international organizations say. You know, you can do it. And in the end, you will actually be successful, because luckily our government has been actually successful, extremely successful actually, in the past 16 years. So I will try to focus on kind of two main areas, and in the end I will talk a bit about energy as well, because that's, I think, a bit more related to the topic of Davos and the whole event we are here now. One main element is the complete revamp of the welfare system in Hungary. Hungary was very similar to most European countries, and I think increasingly America as well, in that we had you know, to be fair, we still have a pretty big welfare system, but we had a system which we inherited from communism, where people were basically not incentivized to work. So we had a system where it was very easy to stay at home, not seek jobs, and just stay at home on benefits. Now, the conservative government coming in felt that this was wrong in principle, so they introduced the idea of a workfare society. This entailed the complete revamp of the kind of social security system, which of course was very much criticized by the left, because they said it was unfair, it was you know, bad for poor people, good for rich people, the usual things we sometimes hear. In the current Hungarian system, if you are unemployed, then you only get unemployment benefits for 3 months, which is the lowest in the European Union. And afterwards, if you don't find a job, the government actually offers the opportunity to be part of a so-called workfare program, which I know for a lot of people sounds very bad. Because I have libertarian leanings, I had some doubts about the programs as well. But it turns out that it's pretty successful. And also the conservative in me sees the kind of the main elements behind it. So the workfare program. In the workfare program, people get something which is around the minimum wage. And they do works for usually the local communities. They will cut the grass, tend the roads, things like that. Sometimes you have the kind of cultural stuff as well, but it's not really high-skilled labor, but things which you still need to do for a healthy community. And as I said, you get something around the minimum wage, which is higher than what you will get if you would be on benefits. But also, as I said, in the current system, you actually have to choose to do that if you want to get money, because if you just stay at home, you will get very insignificant money. Now, as I said, I was partly skeptical about it, but if you look at the statistics, people who were involved in this program, at the height of the program, in the beginning, you had more than 200,000 people involved in these programs. Now you have less than 70,000. So a vast majority of the people who were involved in these programs have been able to go back to the proper labor market. And found proper jobs. Now, when I was working at Századvég, which Mary already mentioned, we actually did a very in-depth analysis about this, and we actually went down to some of these villages where sometimes 70–80% of the people were involved in these programs. And what we saw that was, for me, was pretty astonishing, because you had some pretty good kind of free market-oriented successes. So in one of the villages, they managed to do kind of local co-ops where they were making agricultural products for Tesco and some of the bigger multinationals. And they actually basically, the people transferred into a company, so they were not involved in the workfare program. They were actually, as I said, have this kind of small local co-op. Another one, again, they transferred and they actually made a clothing factory, which was making clothes to, again, big multinationals like H&M and C&A. And also what was kind of interesting to see is how people's attitude shifted. So if you went and talked to people, previously a lot of people looked down on people on welfare. They said, you're in the pub all day, you're getting all this government money and not doing anything. But now that changed, because now they see these people working. They see them cutting the grass. They see them building the roads, and they have a bigger respect. And if you talk to the people involved in these programs, they love it. They also say they feel more respected. They like to work. And they feel better if they go to the pub after working. They feel better. I mean, that's a real thing in the countryside. And what I think as a conservative is even more important is that now you have families, you have children who are growing up seeing their parents working and not just staying at home on benefits. I think this is something which you cannot really, underestimate, because even if, let's say, 60,000 people will always stay on these programs, there's better hope for their children to not be involved in this, because they will see a better example. And I think that's something, as I said again, as a conservative, is a very good thing. Staying on this topic, so they didn't just introduce the workfare programs, they cut taxes on people. Personal income taxes in Hungary has been cut. Currently, you have a flat 15% income tax, which might sound a bit much for some of our American friends, but in Europe, that's actually very, very low. And also what is unique in it, that it's a flat income tax rate. So if you make $1 million, you still pay 15%, but if you make 100,000, you still pay 15%, which the left hated, because previously you had a progressive taxation system where actually you had people who were paying more than 40% as personal income tax. So a very significant shift. And they also cut a lot of taxes involving labor and companies. We have one of the lowest taxes on work in the European Union, which means that actually the economy started growing. So Hungary was almost in a similar situation as Greece during the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And by the first 3 or 4 years, our current government basically changed the whole economic landscape and managed to return the economy to economic growth. This was interesting and, in a sense, again, something which a lot of elites didn't like. So it's a little known fact that sadly Hungary doesn't have a double taxation treaty with America now, which was a political tool, but also it was partly because Hungary was not supporting the global minimum tax, which the Biden administration was trying to push, because our taxes are actually lower than the global minimum tax. So it didn't make any sense for us to sign with the agreement. In the end, we sadly had to. Again, if you look at the statistics, the program was successful because we created about 1 million new workplaces. So participation rates in Hungary really went up. It's one of the highest again in the EU, and much higher than it was during the socialist governments. So it seems that kind of this more conservative attitude towards work and welfare was successful and interesting. It seems to be working as well. Another element which I think was very different to how other governments are doing it is migration and family policies. I see kind of two main, how should I say this, themes about this topic. I think there's the Western European way, which is basically, we cannot really do anything about migration, they will just come. And by the way, migration is actually good. There's, I think, a second theme, which is mostly East Asia. It's changing a bit, but I think Japan, South Korea, increasingly China as well, say we don't need migration, but we cannot really do anything about the birth rate. So let's invest in automatization and robotics, and we will replace our aging populations with robots, basically. Now, Hungary said basically no to both of these approaches. We said that, of course, legal small migration could be good, and we have that. So I will talk a bit about that later. But mass illegal migration is not good for your countries at all. And also, actually, you might be able to incentivize your own people to have more babies. Of course, this is very controversial, and we were kind of accused of racism and nativism, because why you want to have your own people to have more babies? But we didn't really care about these criticisms. We felt that it's completely common sense that as democratic elected governments, you should try to help your own people, and not, it doesn't mean that we have no obligations whatsoever, but your most important obligation is towards your taxpayers and your own population, which sadly it seems that a lot of European country leaders have forgotten. And also it's interesting, because if you look at the statistics, it's evident that even in more progressive European countries like Sweden or Norway, if you actually poll women, most women would like to have more children than they currently have. And if you ask them why they don't have that extra child, they usually give economic reasons for that. So it made, from our government standpoint, make perfect sense to try to alleviate some of these economic fears and try to help people to have more kids. So staying a bit on migration, in 2015, we basically experienced an unprecedented migration pressure in Hungary. Previously, we were not really used to it. Hungary was more of a net contributed to migration. So a lot of Hungarians sadly left after the Second World War, after our 56 revolution against the Soviets. And even after we joined the EU, a lot of Hungarian guest workers did go to Germany, the UK, other places to work. So we didn't really have a huge pressure on us regarding migration. We were not really a point of destination for migrants. This changed in 2015 when the so-called Balkan route has been revitalized. And during that time, in a short period of a couple of months, basically more than 400,000 people crossed the Hungarian border. We also had an unprecedented almost 200,000 applicants for asylum seekers as well. Now, first of all, what we tried to do is, we didn't know what to do with these people, because we never had an experience with this kind of a pressure. And also we got a lot of mixed messages from the European Union. So first they criticized us on letting in the people, so we stopped them, we didn't let them in. Afterwards, we had the infamous speech from Angela Merkel where she said, "Wir schaffen das," so we will solve it. And then afterwards, we actually let them to go to Germany. But what we did in the end is we actually built a fence, which is not a high-tech fence, as Tucker Carlson said in his show as well when he checked it out. It's a simple barbed wire, basically, where we have patrols, and it's also a strong message to people who try to cross that there's some physical barrier towards you are coming into the country. And surprisingly, it worked. So of course, you have to have power there, and you have defense, and if it's being repaired, if somebody tries to cross, you still have illegal crossings, but it went down. Today we have a couple of incidents per day, which is basically nothing, and it's actually lower than what we had before the migration crisis. So a simple kind of barbed wire fence can have a very strong effect on how these people see their chances, but also the attitude that if you try to come in, we will try to catch you. So in Hungary, we don't have ICE, and perhaps they are not as drastical as ICE, but in Hungary, police officers can check you, and if you found it to be an illegal migrant, so even if you somehow did get into the country illegally, and you get caught in a routine kind of inspection, first, of course, you have the opportunity to go home. They will take you home. You can show your documents. Are you here legally? Do you have an identity card or something like that? And if you don't have any of those, they will basically escort you down to the Serbian border and show you out. It's, again, a very strong message. You can say it's, unhuman or against human rights, but it's a very strong message. And we have been actually very much inspired by Tony Abbott, who's been very fortunate to be our visiting fellow at the New Institute, but also he really influenced Hungarian migration policy as well, because he also had the bravery to say no. So he had a policy where he stopped the boats, he sent them back, and of course a lot of people criticized him, but after he did that for a couple of months, nobody came, because you had a very strong message that the ships were going to be turned back. And also, if you try to cross illegally in Australia, they basically told you will not be able to come in legally anymore in the future. So again, a very strong message which disencouraged people to come in, very similar to Hungary. Now, originally, we also introduced something which we called as transit zones, which are basically between the no man's zone between Serbia and Hungary. The purpose of the transit zones is that, sadly, once somebody actually gets into the European Union, it's very difficult to contain them. So a lot of the problems we have in Europe is that the migrants show up at the border, you let them in, and then, of course, you have kind of processing centers, camps where you can process them, but there's no real physical barriers there, so they can basically just go away. They don't really have to stay there, and then a month later, they are already in Sweden. So we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have these facilities outside of the EU where we can process if these people are actually proper asylum seekers or they are just economic migrants. And the statistics were shocking. So we have the statistics from that time. About 70% of the people who tried to come were actually economic migrants and not proper asylum seekers. We also have the statistics, and these are what they actually claimed and where we could confirm. I mean, a lot of people were showing up, burning their passports, claiming to be Syrians, and they were perhaps for some other countries. But even those where we know the statistics, as I said, 70% of them were actually not asylum seekers. And coming from countries like mostly like Kosovo, Pakistan, Bangladesh, but also places like Barbados and like very, very far away places which you didn't really understand why they are in the Balkans. But it shows that it's not really about asylum. But again, looking at the Geneva Accords and kind of refugee policy, we felt that we were justified. But even if somebody is claiming to be a Syrian, why are they at the Hungarian border? So according to the Geneva Convention, you should go to the first safe country, which if you're a Syrian, it could be Turkey. But if you're not happy with Turkey, then it could be Greece. It could be Macedonia. It could be Serbia. You have several countries you pass, which are safe countries, and you shouldn't be in Hungary. Again, a very kind of unique approach. And a lot of European countries said you don't have that approach to migration. And in the end, the European Union found us and also said the transit zones are against human rights, so we had to get rid of the transit zones. And what we did out of desperation is that basically today in Hungary, you are not able to submit an asylum application at the border. If you want to apply for asylum, you have to go to a Hungarian consulate and embassy and do it there properly with the proper paperwork. Of course, again, the European Union and the court said this is unlawful, and because of this, even today, we're actually paying 1 million euros per day as a fine towards the European Union because we are not accepting their interpretation of the law, and also because we said no to the forceful distribution of migrants, because the European Union has a plan that each and every member state should, according to its economic output and a number of people, accept a certain number of migrants in the EU. So countries like Italy and Spain are a bit better off. Now, as I said, we said no to this, and we said that we can actually help our own people with proper policies and can encourage our own people to have more babies. So we introduced a very systematic family policy program, which has several elements. A very important element is tax breaks. People who have more kids pay less tax. This is true for males and females, but what is perhaps very unique is that we introduced first that mothers who have 4 children don't have to pay personal income tax for their life. We changed that to mothers with 3 children last year, and from this year we're actually hoping to change it to mothers with 2 children who are under a certain age. Now, of course, I know Americans pay taxes together. I would love that system. We sadly don't have that in Hungary, so this is better for the woman than the man. But as I said, even men pay less taxes according to this system. They also introduced elements where you have low interest loans or low interest loans which actually become free money if you have 3 kids, or you promise to have 3 kids and then eventually you will have 3 kids. These loans, most of them are aimed to help young families to buy property or build a property. And again, statistics show that some of the alleviations towards not having more kids is that in most of Europe, home ownership is a dream, and also about half of the people or even less actually own property. So we felt that with encouraging property ownership, if somebody is actually owning a house or a flat, they will be more incentivized to actually have children as well, because they will be kind of economically safer. And Hungary actually has a very, very high, compared to other European countries, home ownership rate, which we actually think is a very good thing. And as I said, we try to help young families with these low interest loans to actually buy property. Another element is that so-called big families, which we call families which have 3 kids or more, have other kind of social benefits as well, like free textbooks in schools, free lunches in schools and kindergartens. So again, some of the economic, should I say this, burdens you might associate with childbearing are not there, because it has been eliminated. Now, the interesting thing is that it seemed to be working. So in Hungary, marriage rates doubled, abortion rates went down by half, even though we didn't actually touch the abortion laws for a long time. A couple of years ago, we introduced the Heartbeat Act, where somebody who wants to abort a child has to listen to the heartbeat. But even before we introduced that law, as I said, it's quite recent, abortion rates have fallen. Also, the birth rate has went up. So Hungary had one of the lowest birth rates in the European Union, about 1.2. At the peak, we almost reached 1.7 birth rate. Now, sadly, since the war broke out in Ukraine, our birth rates have started to fall again. Now it's a bit under 1.4, still higher than what we had before the family policy started. But also the context is very different, because now if you look at birth rates across Europe, Hungary has the 3rd highest birth rate. So sadly, a lot of countries' birth rates have fallen, partly because of the war, but we can see that very much in our region. For example, the Czech Republic had a very high birth rate compared to other countries. Now it's lower than Hungary. I can assume that it's partly because of the fear of the war in the neighborhood. So you see a lot of statistics that everyday Hungarians fear the escalation of the war. It's very close, of course, to Hungary, so it makes sense. But sadly, that has an impact on people's attitudes to childbearing as well. I still believe that without these programs, our birth rates will be much lower. So very likely we will be around 1 or perhaps even lower. So I think even though we have saw a drop of the birth rates. I think the policy is shows to be working and something which has some real impact on life as well. And I really like, again, as a conservative, the doubling of marriage rates, because again, if you look at a lot of the statistics, children who are growing up in marriages have much better life chances than those who don't. Even if you compare them with families who are living in civic unions, so they live together, they have some legal form of commitment, but it's still not marriage. So even with children compared to these relationships, children growing up in marriages have much better success chances. So I think even if you would have just noticed the doubling of marriage rates and the dropping of abortions, you would already be very happy. But luckily, we also saw quite significant increase in the birth rates as well. Now, we also had some ideological fights on this as well. So I'm partly British, and I'm more in favor of not having actually constitutions, but Hungary has a constitution since communism, and in that constitution we actually did put in that marriage is between a man and a woman, very controversial, and eventually we even put in, which is even more controversial and kind of sad, it's something you have to put in, is that father is a man and mother is a woman. Again, very controversial, but clear messages towards the European Union that these are something which we're not compromising in. So we tried to put some constitutional protection as well. And even more, perhaps controversially, we introduced the Child Protection Acts, which a lot of progressive people were trying to kind of portray as some anti-homosexual, anti-gay bill, a bit like what was happening with Ron DeSantis in Florida as well. That was not the purpose of the bill. The bill doesn't say homosexuality. It's all about sexual propaganda against minors. So if you try to show, sexually explicit stuff to people, kindergarten or primary school under 14 years old, even if it's heterosexual content, that's not allowed. And why am I saying this? Because actually you have progressive European countries like the Netherlands that you have kids shows like that, where they don't show necessarily homosexual things, they just show heterosexual people naked, engaging in acts, because they try to teach children about sexuality. Now, I think that should be up to the parents. We are not against, sexual education in school, but that should be in high school or at the very, later time in primary school, and certainly not for children who are in kindergartens or who are 8 or 9 years old. So that was, again, something which was a very controversial topic where we kind of took the globalist agenda on. Now, I don't want to talk too much. I might have been already, actually, because I'm really looking forward to the kind of the panel afterwards. But what I want to kind of talk, because we talked a bit about energy, is a bit of our energy policy, because I think that's also interesting in a sense, because the Hungarian government very early on recognized that this kind of climate protection, other issues, people are passionate about it, so we do have to do something about it. And also, actually, this could be something where conservatives have a voice, because as a conservative, as somebody who's a Christian, I believe that we are stewards of the earth. It's in the Bible. So, of course, as stewards, you don't want to destroy the earth. You don't want to, live in a barren wasteland. But also, because you're stewards, animals shouldn't be more important than humans. But you have some responsibility to the planet and also to further generations. So what we did is we tried to kind of implement some of these policies without having crazy net zero policies, or without trying to be this climate change activists. But we tried to kind of philosophically reclaim, through the works of Scruton and others, kind of a protection of the planet towards conservatives. We also, again, a little known fact, and I know I'm not going to get a lot of credit here, but Hungary is one of the countries which increased its share of renewables the highest in the European Union. It's mostly solar panel energy. Now, as I said before, you boo me out here. You have to understand that we have a very high reliance on Russian gas and oil. So part of this is actually to get rid of that reliance. And also the programs were mostly aimed at homeowners, because, as I said, one of the biggest issues in Hungary with the over-reliance of gas is actually not because of the economy, it's because of everyday people. A lot of people use gas in their homes, in the big tenement houses, which are built under communism, and in everyday homes. So if you can get rid of that, if you can help these people to have less gas consumption, then you will be less reliant on Russian gas as well, and eventually you'll able to cut that off or have a better deals. So that's why we were more supportive of some of these solar panels. I have solar panels on my home as well. I think it's perfect for your own home, but of course you cannot, have big power, kind of big factories or whole countries are on that. And staying on this, we also put a lot of effort to extending our nuclear reactor. So we are building two new reactors, and also we just signed a huge deal with Trump in early November, where we're hoping to build 10 small modular reactors in Hungary with American help. So we also tried to kind of push this, that in the US, but of course unsuccessfully, that nuclear energy is actually green energy. If you want to have green energy, then nuclear is actually perfect. And we had some, actually France has been pretty reasonable on that question alone, but it's something which we were being passionate. And also, to get some good points, we also never went against fossil fuels. So we understand that fossil fuels have a future. It's something which we have to do. And according to this, actually, Hungary is one of the only EU countries, according to my knowledge, which allows fracking. I have a good friend who's an American businessman, and he is actually doing that in Hungary. And he says that, and hopes, and I hope he's right. I mean, I'm sadly highly skeptical, but still, he thinks that eventually we will have enough gas with fracking in Hungary to actually not need gas outside of Hungary. So let's see, but again, it's something which we've been pushing, and also we've been trying to push back on some of the crazy policies coming from the European Union, because currently now in the European Union, you cannot really get any grants or support on projects involving fossil fuels. I had a very interesting personal experience. I had a good fortune to attend a conference in Azerbaijan, where we had a 3-hour meeting with the president of Azerbaijan. And it was very eye-opening, because he was talking about how he would be very happy to actually build pipelines towards Europe, but there's no interest whatsoever from most of the European leaders. Now, they are actually building from EU money a so-called green cable from Azerbaijan through Georgia to Europe, which will bring solar energy from Azerbaijan and hydro energy from Georgia to Europe. Now, this is very nice, of course, but we would be a bit more happy if you would have a gas pipeline, which would be bringing a lot of gas and oil from Azerbaijan. They are a bit more well known about that than solar panels, I think. But again, it shows kind of the ridiculous attitude of the EU, that they are very happy to support these kind of endeavors, but they are basically very unreluctant to support fossil fuels. And it was really kind of sad and shocking to see this from the president itself, who said he would be very happy to. He actually even said that he might even pay for the whole thing, but because he's hearing these messages that Europe wants to be carbon neutral, wants to get rid of fossil fuels by X, Y, Z, he said, what is my financial interest here? So I build this pipeline, and then I will not get it back, because the EU will not support me. So, as I said, I think it's important for us as conservatives to kind of, as we try to get back our language from the progressives, I think we have to kind of get back this. We shouldn't allow them to be the good guys, because of course we are seen as these, people who want to destroy Earth with fracking and God knows what, and that's not the case. So we conservatives do care about our environment. I don't want to live in a dustbin. That's actually China and India and some other countries who live like that. Not most European American countries. So I think we have to be passionate, and I think the Hungarian government has done some interesting things on kind of reclaiming this attitude towards protecting the earth in a normal conservative way without actually destroying our economy and our economic prospects. So yes, thank you. I think that was all. And as I said, we are very happy to host people in Hungary. So if somebody is interested in learning more about how we do things, let me know. And also, I'm very happy to answer questions later on in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Istvan. Before I introduce the fifth and final speaker of today's session, I'll remind everyone that after this fifth speaker, the Executive Vice President of Heartland, Jim Lakely, will moderate the panel discussion. Ellen Fantini is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the European Conservative. At the publication, she has directed its expansion into news and current affairs, establishing a news bureau in Brussels, and overseeing daily reporting on European politics and EU institutions. Before joining the European Conservative, Ellen was the executive director of the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe, a Vienna-based NGO, and she has also served as a consultant to other international organizations and freedom organizations. Trained as a lawyer, Ellen is a frequent speaker, writer, and commentator on European politics, freedom of expression, bias in the media, religious liberty, and other geopolitical issues. Ellen, you have the podium.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to the Heartland Institute for organizing this fantastic event. And thank you to all of you who are here at the World Prosperity Forum, and to all of you watching this live stream. I have the privilege to close out this excellent session. So, while elites gather in Davos to plot the next phase of their Great Reset, a centralized control, top-down mandates, and the erosion of national sovereignty, we stand here in Zurich to declare freedom is not negotiable, prosperity belongs to free people and not to bureaucrats. So today I will speak about the priorities and vision of the European freedom movement. This movement of nationalist and populist parties across the continent is not fringe. It is the voice of millions of Europeans who are tired of being lectured by Brussels while their living standards stagnate and their identities are erased. In his address to the Munich Security Conference last year, US President J.D. Vance said what millions of European patriots believe, that the internal threats to Europe's democratic values, free speech, and identity pose greater risks than its external adversaries. Here are a few key quotes from Vice President Vance. I quote, "The threat that I worry about most vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. What I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America." He went on, "I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy." Finally, another quote, the last one from Vice President Vance, "And of all the pressing challenges that nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration." Today, and he is speaking, of course, in Germany at the Munich conference, today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country, that is Germany, moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. And we know the situation. It didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent. Similarly, the Trump administration's U.S. national security strategy document, in the section entitled "Promoting European Greatness," critiques Europe's trajectory under the influence of Brussels, that is the EU, highlighting issues like migration-driven demographic shifts, regulatory overreach, and erosion of sovereignty and liberties. So I'll quote just briefly from the National Security Strategy document itself. Continental Europe has been losing share of global GDP, down from 25% in 1990 to 14% today, partly owing to national and transnational regulations that undermine creativity and industriousness. But this economic decline is eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. This is the US National Security Strategy relating to Europe, talking about the prospect of civilizational erasure. It goes on. The larger issues facing Europe include activities of the EU and other transnational bodies that undermine political liberty and sovereignty, migration policies that are transforming the continent and creating strife, censorship of free speech, and suppression of political opposition, cratering birth rates, and loss of national identities and self-confidence. Finally, the document goes on to say, if the present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. The United States wants Europe to remain European, to regain its civilizational self-confidence, and to abandon its failed focus on regulatory suffocation. So, these critiques in both Vice President Vance's speech and the NSS are precisely the issues that patriotic, sovereigntist European parties have long sought to combat through policies, emphasizing border control, national identity preservation, resistance to supranational EU authority, and the protection of free expression against elite-imposed restrictions. And millions of Europeans agree. In the 2024 European Parliament elections, approximately 42.8 million Europeans voted for parties whose MEPs joined the Patriots for Europe, Europe of Sovereign Nations, and the European Conservatives and Reformists, representing nearly a quarter of the total EU vote. And today, if combined in the European Parliament, these groups would easily be the largest bloc, as Harold Wilimski pointed out yesterday. So this surge is just one example of the movement's growing mandate. And yet, other speakers have laid out the EU's freedom-crushing agenda in great detail, in particular, the EU's stranglehold of regulation. But I think these things bear repeating, so I'll just add a few more horrible details. Let me start with the reality on the ground. Just as we thought woke was dead, Brussels declares it to be a top priority for 2026. They've chosen to double down on an ideological agenda that appears utterly detached from the material reality facing Europeans. While the world is moving towards pragmatic decisions on foreign policy, defense, economic sovereignty, the EU insists on turning climate and gender ideology into central pillars of its political action. So look at this stark contrast. It's impossible to ignore. Ordinary Europeans grapple every day with skyrocketing food, energy, and housing prices, precarious jobs, rising crime rates, and deepening social rifts. And the European Commission seems determined to move away from those issues. Instead, for 2026, we're handed the same tired menu of abstract buzzwords defending democracy and European values. Of course, the United States has pointed out that we're doing neither of those things. Pushing gender equality and ideology, advancing LGBT issues, rushing headlong into decarbonization, policing online safety, and championing sustainable finance, whatever they mean by that. So what's crystal clear is that real structural challenges get shoved aside yet again to make room for a cultural and identity-driven crusade. And this isn't just some oversight, it's deliberate. It mirrors exactly the 2024 to 2029 political guidelines from the European Commission president. It's doubling down on the Green Deal forever, expanding equality and diversity mandates, and embracing an aggressive, almost militant take on, quote, defending democracy, but one that increasingly looks like top-down control of speech, media, and digital spaces. Mario already spoke about the horrors of the Digital Services Act, and the EU has completely dodged any real conversation about true pluralism and actual freedom of expression. Meanwhile, the climate fixation stays front and center, no matter the price. In fact, today in Strasbourg, the farmers from all over Europe have converged to try to yet again have their voices be heard. But instead, the Commission pushes faster decarbonization, deeper Green Deal reforms, even as European factories bleed competitiveness, families stagger under high energy bills, and major economies outside the EU chase energy security and growth without apology. So the same pattern repeats with the identity agenda. These are seen as core, cross-cutting priorities imposed without any genuine debate in member states. As Istvan pointed out, Hungary's very sane, grounded in biology, enshrinement in their constitution about men being men and women being women, there being two sexes and fathers being men and mothers being women. Those kinds of very simple biological facts are still being debated in the EU. In fact, the EU recently released a 200-page taxpayer-funded manual on, wait for it, inclusive language. Our friends at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, that's MCC, recently exposed this. It advises civil servants to avoid words like male and female because they're too biological, to replace mother tongue with something less maternal, and to stop saying children because it's too general. And this isn't satire. This is official EU guidance. So while Brussels spends Europeans' money to police our speech, while ignoring the farmers' protests, energy crises, and skyrocketing costs, Europeans have had enough. And I just want to make one note on the hypocrisy of both actions and language. Just 3 days ago, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said 3 days ago, quote, "Territorial integrity and sovereignty are fundamental principles of international law. They are essential for Europe and for the international community as a whole." These are important words, she said. Apparently, the EU has suddenly become quite concerned about borders and sovereignty as they relate to Greenland. They insist that, quote, "Greenland is for Greenlanders," but apparently it's racist to say, for example, England is for the English or Germany is for the Germans. And speaking of territorial integrity, the failures of the EU's open borders policies are compounded by another boondoggle, the European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights. So the European Court of Human Rights, an unelected institution in Strasbourg that, for example, prevents the deportation of dangerous criminals. And we've seen outrageous cases of this. Sex offenders and rapists staying in the UK due to perceived ill treatment risks if they're sent home. Or family life claims, overriding justice, similar absurdities in Denmark, in Greece, punish border defense and encourage illegal crossings. Of course, these absurd outcomes mock justice, endanger our people, and erode trust in the system. So I could go on and on, but I won't, about what's wrong. But what we do know is that what Europeans really want. Polls across Europe, from France to Germany to UK, show massive majorities demanding one thing: deport failed asylum seekers, illegal migrants, especially those convicted of serious crime. Yet every time governments try to act on this overwhelming public will, the European Court of Human Rights steps in with vague, overblown interpretations of human rights law and block these actions. So when people speak out and resist, well, Brussels uses the censorious Digital Services Act to find the platforms that give these people a voice. There are other organizations, for example, NATO's, quote, hybrid threat center, that worries about NATO member citizens speaking out against these kinds of crazy policies. Thankfully, the Trump administration is showing the way by withdrawing the United States from these kind of ridiculous agreements and bodies, and Europe needs to follow. And speaking of Trump, his cuts to the USAID funding, slashing 80 to 85% of programs and dissolving the agency in 2025, these cuts have exposed the stranglehold, the globalist stranglehold on Europe. So as USAID poured billions into NGOs promoting progressive agendas like open borders, gender ideology, and the censorship under the guise of aid, it put the thumb on the scale against patriots by bankrolling activists and media that smeared patriotic sovereigntist parties as far-right extremists. And with all that money drying up, maybe the playing field will equalize a little bit. So the bottom line is Brussels and the other globalist elites are afraid of sovereign nations and their citizens. And this is why the freedom movement is rising. So this is great news. And I'll give you just a few examples of the rise and growth of sovereigntist, patriotic parties and movements across Europe and beyond. And then I'll close with what we believe and what these rising parties believe in a call to action. So as we know, in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, or AfD, has surged in 2025 in the Bundestag election to become the second largest party in Germany. But guess what? Now it's the number one party in Germany. They reject open borders, high energy costs from green policies, and cultural erosion. The AfD's popularity and the popularity of its message has the German elites so worried that they have repeatedly tried to ban the party's existence. In France, Marine Le Pen's National Rally, or Rassemblement National, is topping the presidential hypothetical polls, leading those polls at around 34%. They're focused on curbing migration-linked crime, reducing regulations, and reclaiming French sovereignty. And this is resonating. It's resonating across France. So they top the polls, even as the establishment has done everything it can to cut them off at the knees, including what many consider to be bogus charges against Marine Le Pen, the head of the party, that are now on appeal, which then led to an unprecedented public punishment of being barred from running for public office. So your most popular candidate is now barred from running for public office. And still, Jordan Bardella, her deputy, is now in first place in the hypothetical presidential polls. In Spain, the patriotic party Vox exploded from obscurity in 2013 to third place today. And if you look at the polls, Vox is the only party that's rising as everyone else loses votes. they're also pushing against gender ideology, immigration, and separatism, and opposing the EU austerity that hurts everyday Spaniards. Austria's Freedom Party, the FPÖ, leads by far in the country at 36%, up from 29% in their recent election win. They're tough on immigration, reduced EU contribution, protection of traditions, and however, and this is a scandal in my view, despite the party's clear first place finish in the elections, they were unable to form a government. Why? Due to the cordon sanitaire, this firewall strategy used by all the other parties to isolate them. So rather than the Freedom Party, the winner by far of the elections, forming a government, a coalition with others, instead, they're shoved to the side with this firewall, and the Austrian government is now comprised of what I and others have called a coalition of losers. And as Istvan pointed out, Victory's Viktor Orban has very successfully prioritized border security, family policies, and resistance against the EU, delivering growth despite repeated and unrelenting political and economic pressure from Brussels. I could go on. I'll give you one more fantastic and inspiring example from just this past Sunday, elections in Portugal. So this was the first round of the presidential elections. It's not one and done. It's a first round of presidential elections. And André Ventura, the national conservative firebrand and leader of the Chega party, was the clear winner, even though he didn't come in first. He proved not only that he was able to retain the 23% of Portuguese who voted for Chega in last year's parliamentary election, but he increased that share. And more importantly, he qualified for the runoff against the socialist. And for the first time in the history of the Third Republic, the second round of a presidential election in Portugal will include an unabashedly right-wing candidate. So in 6 short years, Chega went from having 1 MP to being Portugal's main opposition party. This is fantastic. As we know, outside the EU, Nigel Farage's Reform UK is leading in the UK polls. And as James Taylor earlier pointed out, Reform emphasizes common sense policies, national sovereignty, and opposition to what it calls the elite betrayal of ordinary people. So British voters are also hungry for disruptive force. A note about Switzerland. Here we are in Zurich, just kilometers or miles from Davos. Here in Switzerland, the People's Party, that is a right-wing party, tops the polls. The party combines a national conservative with right-wing populism elements along with economic liberalism. It strongly emphasizes Swiss independence, direct democracy, and opposition to EU membership. Who can blame them, or closer integration. The wave of these patriotic parties isn't limited, of course, to the United States or to Europe or to our neighbors here on the continent. We've also seen in Latin America massive successes in Chile, in Argentina. We see across Latin America, this, what they call the pink tide, right? This is the communists in Latin America. Well, they're getting a real challenge from the blue tide. We have elections in 2026 in Latin America, in Costa Rica, in Peru, in Colombia. And we could really see a hemispheric alliance of sovereigntists trading freely, defending identities. And of course, President Trump's second term inspires European sovereigntists profoundly. His America First model is one that mirrors the demands of sovereign nations across Europe. So what is it that from Berlin to Budapest, London to Lisbon, what is it that we're fighting for? Well, I think the priorities are straightforward and rooted in common sense. National sovereignty, no more outsourcing decisions to unelected commissioners in Brussels. We demand control over borders, budgets, and laws. Prosperity follows when decisions are made by those accountable to their own people. Number two, cultural identity and traditional values. So Europeans are rejecting the erasure of their heritage. European identity, not forced diversity, is its strength. And this matters because without preserving unique histories, languages, and traditions, societies lose cohesion, leading to division and alienation. So contrast this with Brussels' push for homogenization, which of course dilutes the very thing that makes Europe vibrant and resilient. Third, economic freedom, free markets, low taxes, and deregulation. Not ESG mandates or net zero obsessions that destroy jobs. We're on the side of farmers, small businesses, and workers who want to keep the fruits of their labor. Top-down green agendas have shuttered factories, hiked energy prices, and crippled industries. Freedom from censorship, number 4. So we oppose this hybrid threats narrative that's used to quash dissent. Populists aren't threats. We're the antidote to elite arrogance. Without this, ordinary voices are silenced, allowing unaccountable powers to control the narrative on immigration or policy, stifling debate and democracy itself. And number 5, secure borders and controlled immigration. So uncontrolled mass migration is the most pressing issue in Europe, indeed the West. It strains social welfare and social cohesion. Open borders overwhelm services, erode trust, and heighten security risks, as evidenced by rising crime in unchecked migration hotspots. Sovereign nations have a right to secure their borders and halt illegal immigration. They also have a right to decide for themselves which migrants and how many are allowed to live within their borders. These are not radical demands. They are the demands of ordinary Europeans who want their voices heard. So this isn't a dream. It's achievable when sovereignty is respected, when you have alliances built on mutual benefit, not top-down control, you see a thriving society. So the European freedom movement is not just reacting, it's leading. It's the future of this continent, sovereign, proud, and prosperous. So as we gather here in Zurich, just a short private helicopter ride from Davos, let's send a message. The era of globalist control is ending, and the era of freedom is rising. Thank you.
There we go. All right, thank you very much. If we could have the Right Honorable Ms. Truss to come down here, and President Klaus, could you come with us here? No? Okay. Okay. All right, that is fine. But I'm glad, Liz, that you're back from recording your show, your podcast, because as we're looking, that's right. It's an amazing thing. Technology allows that to be so high quality, and a few years ago it wasn't that big of a deal. Again, thank you, Mario, for telling everyone on the stream that my name is Jim Lakely. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Heartland Institute, and I will be conducting this panel here with a lot of your questions that are watching the stream today. We have viewers from all over the world. It's really amazing, and it's an honor to have you here with us today. And like I said, Liz, I'm very glad that you were able to sit down here because a lot of the questions are for you, or at least the first few coming along as they were coming in as you were doing your presentation, which was great. Well, here's a good question. This is from Douglas Pollock, who is a friend of ours from Chile. We know him very well. He watches often. He says, "Dear Ms. Truss, in your opinion, why has the UK never been able to see the dividends of Brexit until now?"
Well, fundamentally,
Microphone down there, please. Yeah, could you?
Although we left the EU, we didn't get rid of any EU laws.
Mhm.
So we didn't get rid of the Natural Habitats Directive, the Working Time Directive, and some rules we've actually made more stringent than the EU. And this is because of two things. One is that we've had a group of politicians who are in favour of regulation, and that's been on both the Conservative and Labour sides. And net zero is a big part of that, but there are other regulations that those politicians like. But also, the British bureaucracy since the 70s has been very EU facing. And they grew up, if you like, with the idea that one day they might make it to the European Commission, one day they might make it to the World Bank, and these are the people who staff the institutions in Britain. They staff the Treasury, they staff the Environment Department, they staff the Foreign Office. And whilst we left the European Union, we didn't sort of dismantle the British bureaucracy. So we've still got the same tendencies. And these people are constantly pushing for closer alignment with the EU. They don't want to upset the EU. They don't want to take on the EU. So the way that we did Brexit was, in my view, we could have got a much better deal by pushing much harder and being prepared to take the EU on, particularly on things like agriculture tariffs. And we didn't do that. We didn't take them on, and we ended up with an okay deal, but we still got this massive problem with Northern Ireland, and the situation still doesn't work. So the answer is we need to sort out our own problems.
Okay. I have a question of my own, actually. As I jotted down during your presentation, I recalled how Keir Starmer was sitting with Trump in the Oval Office the other day, and he insisted that there is free speech in Britain. I don't believe him.
He literally,
and a lot of people in America don't believe him. Can you talk to that?
So there was a press conference this last summer at Trump Turnberry in Scotland, and they were both asked on camera about free speech. And Keir Starmer said, "We have free speech in Britain." There was literally a woman locked up in jail, Lucy Connolly, for posting on X while he was talking. I mean, the guy is a liar. There's no other way of putting it.
What can be done? What's going to be done about that? You can't have the kinds of reforms that are necessary. The having the popular expression of the people's will actually result in election victories and policy changes is not possible if people are arrested for speaking out against government policy, which now seems to be routine in Britain. Or am I overreading it?
You're not overreading it. We have had numerous people arrested for posting on social media, and journalists have been called at their homes. We had comedian Graham Linehan arrested at Heathrow Airport. So fundamentally at the behest, according to him, of trans activists. And this is what I'm saying about the infiltration of institutions. The police has been infiltrated. We've had this recent case where the West Midlands Chief Constable was found to be fabricating evidence at the behest of local Islamists. And the chief executive of the local mosque was on the selection panel for him to get the job. So the situation is bad. And I think, unfortunately for some time, Britain has led the world in bureaucracy, and we've exported our bureaucracy to various other countries. And we've seen the bureaucracy has become increasingly independent or unaccountable of elected politicians. And as I said, it was under Blair that huge powers were given from Parliament to the bureaucracy and the judiciary as well. And yes, this can be fixed by getting rid of all of those laws and replacing a lot of the people. But that is a huge task. It's a huge task.
Invite everyone on the panel to weigh in on this free speech in Britain, or lack of free speech if you want to, or if not, we can move on to another question. All right.
I'm happy to check.
Go ahead, please.
I mean, they might get banned from Britain.
Yeah, I'm a bit afraid. I mean,
That's the latest thing. Is that
I'm a dual citizen.
you
And
get
can they still ban me if I'm a citizen?
you just be jailed.
Yeah, you won't be.
If you're a foreign citizen, you get banned. If you're a British citizen, you get jailed.
Okay, that's not very good.
You won't be banned. You won't be banned. They're going to come get you and put you in jail.
I'm not sure I should say anything right now, but I want to agree on this. I think there's and again, no offense, but I mean, for example, Boris Johnson did have a huge majority. So if anybody could have changed some of the terrible things Tony Blair and Gordon Brown was doing, that was Boris Johnson. So it's really what is going on in the UK as a citizen. It's terrible to see. I never would have imagined the UK could go so low. As I said, as a Hungarian, I never would have thought Hungary would be far freer than the UK, and it is. And I'm just surprised, and also surprised that more and more people are not protesting and going on the streets, because you can do this because people are not. I mean, you couldn't arrest tens of thousands of people. So if more and more people would be, I mean, I'm just surprised. Why isn't there bigger protests about this? I mean, perhaps people don't know or are so afraid. It's just very strange. That I really thought that kind of the two nations which are the most brave and bold and freedom-loving are America and the UK, and I'm just really surprised. I never would have thought that these kind of things can happen. But I also think that there is sadly the British governments have been very weak on this as well, especially Johnson, because I think he had almost an unprecedented majority, which and popular support, which he could have turned into significant reforms, which he should have done. I'm sorry to say this, because the current system is just inherently anti-British. I mean, it's having basically a Supreme Court. I mean, that's terrible. It's not the English way at all.
Do you want to respond to that anyway?
Yeah, I can. As I said before, I've written about this in my book, 10 Years to Save the West, which goes into a blow-by-blow account of what happened. I mean, the whole British. So 2010, when I was first elected, the original sin of the Cameroons and the Notting Hill Conservatives, which included people like Danny Finkelstein, Michael Gove, George Osborne, etc., is they said, we want to be the heirs to Blair. And they didn't. And, I was, as I said earlier, much more of a supply sider than they were. However, I didn't, in 2010, understand exactly how bad this stuff was, because it was slow burn. So things like the Supreme Court, which was established in 2005, I just thought, well, this is the law lords in a different building, which it kind of was. And when I became, in one of my many jobs that I held in government, Lord Chancellor in 2016 after Brexit, I discovered that I did not have the powers that the job used to have, and that the judiciary were actually being appointed by a self-appointed quango of judges. So I think, one, people took a long time to realize, and this was the cleverness of Blair, is that he said he was acting like a Mrs., he wasn't really changing the policies of Mrs. Thatcher, but he did all this stuff that was very subterranean, like establishing the Climate Change Committee. When it was established in 2008, it didn't have, because the targets were so long away, nobody thought anything, it wasn't thought to be that big an issue. When they put in the Equality Act, which imposed DEI in law, people were like, well, equality is a good thing. So all these acts were called innocuous stuff, like human rights. Who could possibly be against human rights? There's another act, the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010, where they put the civil service code into law, which essentially makes it much harder for ministers to countermand civil servants. But again, all this stuff was it was incremental. It was lots of different things. So that's point one about. And so by the time, we went through a lot of psychodrama, but which I won't. I mean, we could go into Brexit with Theresa May, all that stuff. Very long psychodrama. But essentially, when Boris got into power in 2019, the people around him didn't want to change the system. And he was surrounded by people, and this was partly the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and there was a problem for a long time with candidate selection. Right-wing people were deliberately rooted out. And you can read all about this in various books, but they deliberately selected, centrists. There's a polite way of saying what they are. If you look at, they deliberately selected centrists. And this is kind of the people who, and I've talked about the camera, these people who wanted to modernize the party, they wanted to have more women, more ethnic minorities. That was the focus. They want anybody who wanted to bring back hanging, it was sort of this sort of stuff. So you had all these MPs who, and then a whole load of them got elected in 2019. A lot of them weren't expecting to win. So what they wanted is more money for their constituencies. They didn't want somebody to spend 5 years unraveling the Blairite legacy. And I remember, and I won't say which Boris Johnson special advisor this was, but there are, you can read my book. But for example, I wanted to abolish the Equality Act because I became Equalities Minister. And one of the things I'm proud that I did is I stopped gender self-ID in Britain, because that had been, Theresa May had started that in motion and I stopped it. I mean, I had to do all kinds of kowtowing to all kinds of people, but I did stop that. And I said, we've got to abolish the Equality Act. I'd never, I wasn't in Parliament when the thing had been passed. I not really looked at it closely, but I looked at this thing and it's like, there are these protected characteristics, it's just awful lefty stuff. And I said, no, everybody should be treated equally under the law in Britain. This Equality Act is terrible. We need to redefine equality to be fairness of treatment, not equality of outcome, blah, blah, blah. And one of the Boris advisors says, no, it's too controversial. We can't do it. So so it wasn't, and actually Boris personally was a bit more forward leaning on that stuff, but he was surrounded by this infrastructure in the Conservative Party who didn't want to do it. And by the way, there are issues I don't agree with Boris on. So net zero being a prime example, and China being another prime example. But on the equality stuff, he was relatively good. All I'm saying is that the whole party was taken over. And there were people in the party fighting that, and I'm a primary example of that. And I was the one that got through. But I discovered the same thing, that the entire party infrastructure didn't want to do what I wanted to do when I was in number 10.
Well, I mean, that points to a point, or maybe some other people on the panel, because can all answer this question. It's something again that occurred to me listening to these wonderful presentations was that, how is it that policies that are so unpopular just will not change? I mean, in the United States, we elected Donald Trump, and to be honest, in my opinion, if he would have done 40% of what he's actually done through all of his executive powers and the influence that he has, I would have been doing backflips. And now that he's done way more than that, and it's only been 1 year. And so I have lived my entire life at the age of 55, living in a society in America where there are policies that are not popular. They do not have popular support. They're certainly not things most conservatives would endorse. The years of Ronald Reagan, frankly, alone would be an exception to that. But then Trump is elected, and suddenly the will of the people is being reflected. The border is going to be shut down. He's imposing tariffs. He wants to get rid of the income tax. We're having policy discussions in the United States today that I wouldn't have dreamed of years ago. And that's because Donald Trump is actually making some policy changes that, he's leading the way. And hopefully it'll go faster when you get legislators actually passing laws to make these things more permanent. So the idea that the United States under Donald Trump is the freest, most exciting place to be if you love freedom, and every country in Europe, again, it's like, how is it that things that are that unpopular never get changed? And there seems to be no hope for change.
I can answer that question. The key point about Donald Trump is he was president in 2016. So he was thwarted. He had people leaking. He had conservatives in name only in his administration. He learned from that. And he made sure that everybody he appointed is ultra loyal. I think that is so important. It's one thing I say to people. Intelligence is overrated and loyalty is underrated. There's a lot of, somebody said to me, apropos of MP, he's very intelligent. I'm like, yeah, there's quite a lot of people like Michael Gove's very intelligent, but it doesn't mean that's a good thing. It's an issue when you have people who are intelligent, but they want to do the wrong thing. And what our bureaucracies are full of, and this will be true in the United States, it's true in continental Europe, it's true in the European Union, is you've got very clever people who have bad ideas. And what the left have worked out is these policies aren't very popular. It's not very popular to say, don't have more kids, don't drive a car, don't get any richer, allow blokes in the women's changing rooms. These policies are not popular. So rather than deliberately trying to get elected and saying, we want to allow men in women's changing rooms, instead, Stonewall get their people in the police, or they get their people in the government, or they get people to sign up to the Stonewall Charter. That's how the left have been operating and organizing for the last 30 or 40 years.
I'd like to add something, if I may. You hit on something that's very, very important. All these super intelligent people are graduates of some of our elite institutions on both sides of the Atlantic. And as long as we don't stop that train, meaning turn our backs on the elite legacy institutions, the Ivy League, for example, and promote the creation of new educational institutions, they're going to still be producing these graduates that go on to jobs at the IMF and then go on to jobs in the deep state of Washington or London or wherever. And being a pessimist by nature, I don't see that changing very easily or very soon, but it is something that we try to encourage on various projects. I'll stop there.
Okay, sure. Actually, we have a question in the room here.
Yes, thank you.
Can you come up? Can you come up to the microphone and speak into it, please?
Thank you. We are talking about threats to freedom in Europe. We've just received a message that 2 Farmers Solidarity members have been just arrested during protests in Strasbourg against the Mercosur deal, which we will talk about tomorrow. I was wondering if we might express our solidarity with them. And of course, it's a brutal reminder that what we are talking about is a daring reality, and it's really happening as we are sitting here. So thank you so much. That's not a good news, but I simply felt that I should share it with you.
Right. Thank you. We do stand in solidarity. All right, you might want to. It might be easier just to keep it out of there and pass it along. That stand is a little weird. I guess I just got a note from the people behind the scenes here producing this this stream today. Apparently, Trump. This is from Alan Jessen, actually, one of our viewers. Trump just agreed to meet with NATO and European leaders on Greenland. What do Europeans think? And will the elites cave and make a deal?
Well, I'll start with that one. I mean, first of all, Europeans don't think as a monolith, and even people who consider themselves to be European patriots or conservatives don't think in one block. So just as, of course, Trump says America first, each European country should think of its own country first. And so I think, for example, Denmark feels differently about Greenland than, for example, Hungary might. And so I think no one would say it's a bad idea to have a conversation. And to be frank, I think all of this grandstanding about sovereignty is a bit laughable, given how hypocritical it is. So I'll be interested to see if Trump's tactic, which, I mean, I don't know why people get surprised every time President Trump does exactly the same thing. And I was talking with Linnea yesterday, one of the wonderful speakers from yesterday. People keep on getting surprised when President Trump asks for something outrageous and the terms are outrageous and everyone goes in a panic and starts worrying about democracy all over again. And then a deal is reached. Everyone pretty much leaves okay with the deal, like any deal maker. And then 2 months later, they've forgotten about it. So others, I'm sure, have something much more profound to say. But my feeling is that if people are surprised by President Trump's approach to deal making, it's not like he's hidden who he is and how he operates ever.
No. Okay. Well, let me get to another question here as we have the time for it. This is a good one. This is actually a topic that the Heartland Institute has researched and covered quite a bit over the last few years. Question is, how do we fight the implementation of central bank digital currency in Europe? And is it a tool that can be used for control, as so many warn about?
So I am an arch critic of central banks. And one of the many Tony Blair laws I didn't mention is the 1998 Bank of England Act, which essentially made the Bank of England unaccountable. It made the governor unsackable. And it was my battle against the Bank of England that ultimately enabled my detractors to bring me down. So, I've been face to face with these people. They are an international cabal. I think Trump is right with what he's doing with the Federal Reserve. I think they are a problem. And they are the largest source of unaccountable power. And a lot of these policies we're talking about, they stand behind, essentially. Yes, central bank digital currencies are a big problem, but I would go further and say their current structure is a problem. There's a fashion. Again, a lot of bad stuff seemed to start in the 1990s, apart from the Cold War ending and, Eastern Europe being freed. I think that gave us but I think it gave the West a huge sense of complacency, and we had all this bad stuff starting. And one of it was the trend of central bank independence. And I'm very interested in this year. I've been talking to a lot of people who were involved at the time, who were in the Treasury or the bank. They were saying, I said, why did you do this? I said, the British system worked perfectly well. Mrs. Thatcher and her chancellors had control of monetary and fiscal policy. They were able to transform the British economy, get the country back on its feet. And then you had this process, which actually started with the Maastricht Treaty, which had central banks embedded in it. And then essentially what happened is the Bank of England was announced independent. And since then, we've had a series of disasters. Quantitative easing, I think, has caused huge problems. The response to the financial crash caused huge problems. The printing of money during COVID was really the cause of a lot of the problems I was trying to deal with when I was in number 10. And they said, oh, well, it was kind of fashionable at the time. Everybody else was doing it. We looked at the Bundesbank. We thought it was quite good. I was like, is this a reason to junk, a institution that was actually relatively accountable for hundreds of years? I was like, oh, it was fashionable. And it's the same with the Supreme Court. It's like, well, the Americans and Europeans have these Supreme Courts. Let's just junk 1,000 years of the British Constitution to put this Supreme Court in place. And these things have been a disaster for Britain. And I think they answer the question about why Britain has moved away from its ancient liberties.
Someone should fix that. That would be great. All right. Actually, this is going to be a question for Istvan. This This also had me. I had the same question came into my head. So you said that Hungary is fined how much? €1 million a day
Euros a day, yeah.
for what?
For basically not following EU laws on migration.
Okay,
There's two things. One is, as I said, because we don't allow asylum seekers to actually ask for asylum at the borders of Hungary. And the second thing is we said no to this relocation plan where they would like to, I'm not sure what is the actual number, I think 40,000 migrants they would like to put into Hungary. And we said, we want to protect our own borders and want to choose who we want to live with.
Okay, so $1 million a day.
Yes.
What happens if you don't pay?
Well, that's a pretty good question. I'm not an expert on EU law, but sadly, the real problem here is that we're actually not getting EU funds now properly. So you have the cohesion funds, which Hungary is actually paying into, and we should receive as all European countries. And because of corruption and rule of law issues, we are not getting those monies. They started this before the 2022 elections. They did the same with Poland, with the previous government. Miraculously, as the new government was elected, they had no rule of law issues anymore, and they sent the money. And the even bigger problem is we actually have a COVID recovery fund, which Hungary was very much against because it's a common loan. And we said we are not happy about having a common loan of all European countries, even if it's for COVID recovery, because we're just, we're uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
They still pushed it through, and we are paying the interest rates, but we never got a cent of it. And then, of course, they wanted to do the same for Ukraine, and we said no, because again, we didn't like the idea that you will have this common loan, which we already tried and was not very good for us. So,
are you guys really in the EU? I mean, I started to have my doubts.
But look, I mean, and honestly, I have to tell you this, and I might not be popular, but the original idea of European countries having free trade, working together, I think it's pretty good. So, I'm for a long time I was pretty pro-European in a sense like that. But sadly, it has been captured by people who are trying to push this agenda, and it's turning back to the elite problem we have. So sadly, now we have people in the elites of most of the European countries who either really believe in this, so they really think that we're going to this nice progressive world where everyone's going to be equal, even if it's going to be a Brave New World kind of a system, because I think that's the only system where everybody can be truly equal. I don't like this word at all. Or are just very afraid, like the gravy train in Brussels, the golfing partners are more important than what the people think, and just don't speak out against these things. So they just go, a lot of our, kind of conservative friends in the kind of mainstream old European conservative parties are like this, rhinos, or just, people who are weak or unwilling to kind of push what they should be doing or representing their own people. It's really sad to say. Hungary is luckily not like that, and I think the current government in the Czech Republic is not going to be like that, and hopefully we'll have more and more countries who will follow suit. And that's also something which you don't really talk about. Still, member states in the end have most of the power. So if you would have a very different government in, let's say, Germany and France, you would see a very different European Union potentially.
Did you still want to weigh in on that?
I did want to weigh in. First of all, I think what's been done in Hungary, what Orban has done, is a very good example of taking on the bureaucratic state. And again, you've got somebody like Trump with the experience of doing it, being out of power, coming up with a plan and taking them on day one. And that's really important. I think it's very hard to do when you're in the machine. And I think people who haven't been in government don't understand just what is a combination of feeling like you're in a prison and a sort of drowning at the same time. Maybe it's like being waterboarded. I don't know, but it is like that. Honestly, it's like you can't really describe just what it's like being in the system and having that experience, being out of it, and then taking them on. It's what Orban did. It's what Trump did. So I think everyone needs to learn from what Orban did in his second period in office.
Yeah.
The second point I wanted to make is about the EU. And I think it is basically the leverage the EU have is access to the markets. And basically Hungary would be in serious trouble if they shut off access to the single market. And as you say, the only two countries that can really take that on is Germany and France. They're the only countries with enough leverage to take it on. And My view is the EU just has to be dismantled. You can never have a supranational organization that works. None of them work. The UN doesn't work. The World Trade Organization doesn't work. The World Health Organization doesn't work. They just don't work, because the minute you have unaccountable power, and I'm back to my point about the central bankers, people just misuse it every single time.
Well, when you get back home, tell Orban to not pay it $1 million a day. And I want to see, because I'm curious, I want to see what happens.
Yeah, but they will just, they will literally close the borders. Do you remember? Was it France and Germany had a cheese war, and they wouldn't let us block the borders. That's what they'll do.
Okay. Well, all right. So we're close to the end of time here, and so Mario, you said that you are pessimistic by nature.
Yes.
I'm going
I've been
to.
called Dr. Doom by some of my friends.
You have.
If any of you remember the Marvel Comics character.
Oh yeah. Well, let me see if I can top you on that. So,
Okay.
One of the things that came up in at least the last two presentations in a wonderful afternoon here in Zurich at the World Prosperity Forum, basically can summed up by saying demography is destiny. And Istvan, you were talking about how Hungary is, I think, third in, maybe second or third in Europe in right, third?
Yeah.
Right. Grok says second, so I'll let you have that promotion. I asked them. But regardless, the Hungary is in the top 3. Slovenia is in the top 10. Czechia is in there, as you had mentioned. In fact, everybody in the top 10 is an Eastern European country.
I think France is in the top 10 as well.
Not according to Grok. I don't think Grok I don't think Elon likes France, but just so fine. But it's dominated.
I don't
Let's
think
say.
European statistics, they might be skewed. I don't know.
Right.
But,
Well, my point being that it's dominated by Eastern European countries and has been for a while. And Hungary obviously has instituted very aggressive policies to promote family creation and as large families as possible. This is well known and much discussed here in the United States. The bad news is that your replacement rate, it's not replacement rate. 2.1 is considered bare minimum replacement population rate. I believe Hungary was 1.8, and it's around there, but it's not even yet 2. So to blackpill even my friend Mario here, and you talked about it, Ellen, about how there's nothing inherently wrong or racist about European self-identity and pride and wanting to have a country called Hungary for Hungarians, and et cetera, across, and Britain for Britons, or however you may want to define that. But the fact is that European countries are not replacing themselves. This generation hasn't replaced itself. My generation, Generation X, hasn't done it. The younger you get, the fewer kids are going to have. I don't mean to be completely pessimistic, but does any of this really matter? Hungary's not going to be, there's not going to be Hungarians in Hungary anymore in 100 years or 200 years. But there's not going to be enough. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so unless you really address and fix, lack of a better term, that replacement level birth rate in each of these countries, what's going to happen?
Let's go right down the line. I think all of us want to opine on this. I think we should be talking about replacement, but it should be in terms of the great replacement, an idea that has been well documented and incredibly is now being discussed from the vice president's office to the halls of power here in Europe in some places, in those places that have not forbidden the topic. The great replacement is the idea of a Frenchman who talked and highlighted the very things you brought up, Jim, that native-born populations are not having enough children, well below the 2.1 replacement rate, and that we are importing all sorts of people who have nothing in common with the values, the traditions, the vision of Europeans, and the same can be said of the United States as well. We at the European Conservative have been opening spaces in which we can discuss this idea more and more. And there's a lot of people who are now emboldened to talk about it and to talk about what does the future look like. Unfortunately, back to my own opinion, it is pretty pessimistic. I don't see us turning it around. It's like turning around the Titanic. It's going to take generations and generations. And despite my admiration for the Hungarian program to promote families, it's insufficient. I don't know what else
is required, but I think, and I've been telling people, we should be prepared, and especially industries and companies, for declining consumers and populations, because that's a significant impact. We're already seeing this. Wall Street Journal recently had some reports on how certain businesses are beginning to worry because their clients that they had calculated would continue to grow are suddenly disappearing. Why? Well, because they're dying off. It's the baby boom generation, and there's no one else to replace them as consumers or clients. So I'm very concerned about the future. I'll pass it on to you. Help me feel better about the future.
Look, I mean, I'm going to be kind of un-Hungarian because Hungarians are usually pretty pessimistic, but I'm not that pessimistic. So first thing on the Hungarian policies, it's fairly new. So they have been in place, and they have been extending them constantly for a bit more than 10 years. So I don't think these things will give, kind of immediate measures in a couple of years. It's a long game. So you have to be committed. And, I'm not sure what another government will do, but these policies have been pretty popular with the population as well. So I'm very much hopeful that even if you will have the different governments, they wouldn't really dare to touch some of the main elements. Going back to the problem, we have a problem, and it's a very big problem because of several reasons. One is we live in now cultures, not luckily in Hungary, but in most of Western Europe and partly America, where basically, you should be ashamed of your own culture. So if you're a French person or a British person, you should be ashamed because of slavery, because of colonialism, God knows what. So, children are growing up in school and everywhere, but they should be ashamed of their own culture. Why would you replicate that culture then? It's an even bigger problem because the media is full of it. Movies. I'm a millennial. When I was growing up, you had proper families in TVs. So if you watched a movie or something, you had heterosexual couples having kids. Now, if I watch movies, you hardly have that. It's always single parents, divorced parents. Even if you have them, it's two. Either the husband is some joke, a fool, like basically an oversized baby, or it's some. But really, that's the case. But it's some kind of like a fool in the family, or even worse, it's some aggressive, especially if they are white, and they have to be aggressive, abusive, alcoholic, something like that. But even that is rare. So most of the films or TV shows would not even have these kind of families as well. So you have this culture where, and I wouldn't go into some of the extreme forms of feminism, that actually they say you shouldn't have kids because of climate, but also because you're better off. You can't progress in your career. You cannot have and that's partly for males as well, but I think it's even more damaging for women as well. And I see that even in Hungary with some of the friends of my wife as well, actually. And another thing is economic problems, which goes to the crazy climate change thing sometimes as well, is what do young people have to look forward to? So I said they should be ashamed of their culture, of a lot of things, and also they don't really have the opportunity to get home ownership. They cannot buy houses. They might not be even able to own a car because they will have to buy electric cars or something. And we also have elites, and Germany, for example, is shooting in itself in the foot. So what can you look forward to if you're a young person in Germany? What is your economic future? It's pretty bleak. Why would you have kids? So you have these economic problems which are very serious. You would have to turn them around. Cultural problems which you have to turn around, and if you do these things, but that's a really big job, and you would have to have very brave people reading the countries to change them to have any chance of succeeding. But I think there are good trends. Trump was elected. As I said, we have Orban, we have Babiš now in the Czech Republic. The polls are very promising for a lot of the other populist parties in Europe. So I'm very hopeful that this can be changed. I'm much more hopeful today than I was, let's say, a year ago, especially with Trump being elected. So it's going to be a tough thing, but it's not impossible. And I think there is a shift, especially with young males in the West, where people are becoming more and more conservative. So I'm a pretty conservative person myself. And let's say 10 years ago, if I talked to people, I felt that I'm kind of on the very, how should I say, conservative spectrum. But now I talk to some of these young people and it's like, oh God, this person might be more conservative than I am. So I think there are kind of positive shifts, and let's see. But I'm more hopeful actually than I'm pessimistic, at least today.
Oh, great. Go ahead.
I suppose I'll just add that I think the problem is more cultural than political, and we've seen the secularization and let's say cultural capture of the left at least since 1968, and I don't know if many people were the frog sitting in the slowly heating water, not looking around at the number of children people were having and just saying, well, I mean, 2 is pretty much the same as 3, or 3 is pretty much the same as 2. And, okay, so there are more only children, but that's okay. And not really noticing what was happening. And I do think that culturally, the recapture, let's say, the counter-revolution, the cultural counter-revolution is going to take some time, but I do think that national pride and putting religion back into our culture, the European traditions of the Judeo-Christian West, I think could turn things around. So I'll have to go home with Dr. Doom and fight it out. But I guess I'll be Susie Sunshine and he can be Dr. Doom.
Well, I think it is possible to change the trajectory, but it needs a massive shift. And I think, like, if you speak to, I've got 2 daughters, if you speak to young people in Britain, I think most people want to have a family. It is what people aspire to. They want to have a family. They want to have a good job. They want to live in a nice house. They want to go on holiday. It's what people aspire to. And they also are very proud of their country. But the problem is we've got this elite who are in control, who are not necessarily of that view. But I do think the Hungarian policies of tax breaks, cheap housing, these are the things that make the difference. It's just so, and this is yet another thing central banks have completely done, is through QE, through printing money, have created an asset price boom that has essentially priced lots of young people off housing. And the biggest issue in Britain for families is getting on the housing ladder. And you can just see as you go 10 years younger, people are in smaller and smaller houses and they can't afford to move out of home. It's lots of 20-somethings work in London now live with their parents. That wasn't the case a generation ago. And I think if you really want to shift it, you have to do Hungary plus. You have to do the Hungary policies, but more so, you have to make it incredibly economically advantageous to have a family. You have to, if you said to people, right, if you have 4 kids, you're going to have a great job, a house in London, a great lifestyle, people just sign up for it tomorrow. It's not difficult. That's what they want. It's so, I can't really exaggerate how impossible it feels for people. Really feels impossible. And people that do it have done it because they've been able to earn extraordinary amounts of money, or because of their parents, whatever else. And we've created this, and I think the same trend you see in the United States as well.
Yeah, that's we're going to leave it there. Let's have a round of applause in the room here for our wonderful panel. I mean, we had former President of the Czech Republic, Václav Klaus. We've had Dr. Doom, Alvino Marino, Mario Farini, and Sue Storm over there is also Ellen Farini, and Liz Truss, and of course Istvan Kiss. So thank you very much. What a fantastic, unbelievable round of speakers that we had today. We're going to be back tomorrow, same time, same channel, 3 p.m. Central European Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States. We hope to see you there. Thanks for your support and watching. Bye-bye.